Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my studio. My name is Michael Markowsky, and today we are going to look at your art today because you guys have been pretty busy. We got an amazing community of artists that have been forming organically over the past few years. Almost 300 people, 295 people as part of our group. That's pretty cool, considering this was just an idea that occurred as we were, as kind of momentum picked up here. So, where on earth do we start here with so much art that you guys have been uploading to the Facebook group? How about when the computer... I ordered a new computer. A lot of money going into a new computer, but this thing has been served well for 8 years, which for a computer these days is not bad, but it's reached the end of its lifespan. So okay, let's take a look at some of the art that you guys made in support of Ukraine and the war in Ukraine, and because it seems quite topical right now, and it's pretty cool, some of the interesting ways that you guys have found to shed a little bit of light and to be an ally in support of Ukraine. So here's Kathy's portrait of some sunflowers next to a nice bright blue sky. Love this, really cool. In fact, we got I think 4 of them here, so maybe we'll just look at them together. That's pretty wild, Donna. Impalas, wow. And I don't know if this was a Ukraine sentiment here. It's a sunflower, but since a lot of people are making sunflowers recently, I thought maybe this seems to make some sense. So how about we'll just kind of go back up here to Kathy here. I think this is really cool, Kathy. You know, very iconic type of an image. And when I say iconic, it's really more focusing on the less on super realism and more on like stylistic, because you know the sky itself is just a solid blue and then these solid yellow sunflowers. I think if we wanted to get maybe a little bit more towards a so-called realist kind of painting, I think maybe even just adding a little bit of variation into the sky. The sunflowers, I think, are really well done. I really like the way that you've done this. I think if we wanted to get even more photorealist, then maybe we'd want to have a little bit of shadow underneath between some of the petals, because you know the way that sunflowers, they sort of layer over one of them. And you can even see, just as I do that with my fingers, the fingers below start to get a little bit darker, and then also kind of the what is the inside of a sunflower called? This big kind of black thing where the sunflower seeds come out of. I think we'd also see a little bit of shadow being cast down there. But I mean, I guess just nitpicking. But I'm not saying that's what your goal was or what you want to do. But should you want to do that, because I think the other option would be to go the other way, is to make these more simplified, so that without even putting any of these slightly more golden colors over the yellow, which I think was a great idea. Anyway, just thought I'd mention that. I love this here, Donna. This paint pouring exercise here reminds you a lot of Alberta. Which is not surprising. My family, emigrated from Ukraine before World War I and settled in Saskatchewan. You'd think they would go to Florida or something, but, being a farming family, going to another farming place that sometimes gets much actually colder than Ukraine does in the winter, they went to Saskatchewan. And then I grew up in Calgary, not too far away. So I do completely recognize this kind of, because Alberta, Saskatchewan, big blue skies. I always forget that no matter what time of year I go to Calgary, even in the middle of the winter, to bring sunglasses, because it's always really bright. Even on the coldest day of the year, very, very bright. Paula's here. I love this bird here. I wonder what kind of bird you painted here, Paula. I love that the bird exemplifies some of the colors of the Ukraine flag. It is a little bit more on the purpley side, I think, but that could be the way it's photographed, although I do see a little bit more of this cyan, the cooler blue underneath here, so maybe it just sort of evolved that way, and if that's what happens when you paint, that is totally acceptable. And then here's Susan. Again, I apologize if I've just lumped you in to this Ukraine theme. I really like this, too. I love the splatter effect that you've got here with all these little dots, which is, you know, again, if you're working on a painting and you're not happy with the way it's turning out or the way it turned out, rather than just to throw it away or paint over it, is use it as an opportunity to be a little more playful with it. You can splatter paint on it, and again, I'm not even saying that you didn't like this and that's why you made that decision, but I think it's an opportunity to use some more unconventional painting techniques when you've got a painting that you're not super happy with, right? Because now it's an opportunity rather than a problem. Okay, so lots of people joining us in the chat. This is cool. Lots of lots of conversation going on down there. So let's pick up from where we left off last time, which was, I think we ended with pointillism, and we'll look at here is Stuart Davis, and I think, as far as I know, I could only find one person who did Stuart Davis on our community group, and no surprise, Paula, once again, who I think paints everything that not only I've done, but some things that other people have done too, which is even more remarkable. And I really liked this painting. I'm a huge Stuart Davis fan. This one I was having painted this artist's painting for the first time, it made me respect him even more than I already did. I was already a big fan, and then trying to do it, realizing, wow, this is like even more difficult. And I think it's one of those things that we don't, maybe I don't anyway, I can only speak for myself, is until I try to do some of these paintings, I think like, oh, this will be a kind of a fun, silly, fast one, and then you go like, wow, there's to get. I mean, we could have used tape for this and get much sharper edges, but that would be a really complex taping job. And there's other materials that we can use, like you know, there's a few different fluids. One of these days, I want to do an episode of using these types of things. Let's see. So a couple of materials. I thought I had some of these around here. I have a whole bunch of tape as well. Where did I put that? I'm sure I'll find it 10 minutes after we finish up. But one of the things that you can use in lieu of tape, and I have some really thin tape, and of course, I don't know why I can't. It's always when I go live I can't find the things I need. But these are some tools that you can use. They're fluids that you can squeeze out onto a canvas and then let it dry and then paint over it and then peel it off. To various different levels of satisfaction. Sometimes it works better than others, but that's, you know, if people are interested in learning a little bit about using masking fluid, let me know in the comments, and I'll see if I can incorporate that into a painting. The reason why I haven't really used it is because probably most people don't already have it, and I'm always a little bit anxious about devoting an episode to a tool that most people don't have. Because it makes it a little bit more difficult for people to do it, but maybe I'll sneak it in somewhere. So anyway, you guys let me know how you feel about that. Okay, So let's move on here to Mondrian. And Piet Mondrian, we did. Let's look at a bunch of the works that you guys sent in, because there's some people who did some creative variations on the Mondrian theme here. And here's Paul that combined the 2 Mondrian paintings we did into one. And Susan did the same thing. I love seeing them together like that. And then this is the painting itself. I love here there's a square version, which the original was square as well. And Maria's cool. Pascal. That's great. And I love Ravi sort of, this turned it into like a fractal. It's kept on going and going and going, smaller and smaller. Me and my 10-year-old son did this last year. Okay, so let's start here, because this is those are all the Mondrian paintings. Isaac says, could you look at the drawing I sent you on Instagram? Did you send it to me as a message? I'm not sure. I'll take a look a little bit later on here. So anyway, I love this here, Ravi. First of all, I love the fact that you collaborated with your son to make this painting, and I'm always a big advocate for collaboration, especially with family and friends. It's a great way of sort of creating some, bonds and creating something that, you can keep in your house for generations afterwards, right? And I hope you guys both signed the back of it too, and put a date on it so you remember, right? Because maybe 50 years later, your son will look at this and go like, oh, wow, that is so cool. Or maybe his son or daughter, right? Or grandson or granddaughter, right? So I think this is really cool. Great work. I love the just in terms of the way that we do these Mondrian paintings, is there's just a lot of layers of sometimes the same color or multiple different colors, and it just looks red at the end, but there might be greens and blues and stuff underneath, I think, as we'll see here. And Pascal did a couple of these Mondrians, but this is one of them. A very, almost like expressionist take on Mondrian here. Very brushy. Mondrian did this sort of work earlier on in his career, but towards the time where he was painting much more these sort of rigid grids, things became much more ruled and less loose. But this is sort of his early style combined with his late style, I guess. And here's Sandra's. I love this. I love, Sandra, you've been documenting here with a GoPro on a stand. I've got a lot of these arms here holding all these cameras and lights up around here, so I appreciate your setup. That's very cool. What to say about this? I think it turned out really well. Yeah, it looks cool. I mean, I guess, we could maybe tighten up some of these lines a little bit. I think I used tape when I did mine, just to kind of get that effect. And if you haven't used tape, that might be a fun little exercise just to challenge yourself with. I think in that episode I used tape, so you can kind of see how I did that. Here's Maria's version. Very cool. What I like seeing here, Maria, is just those little bits of like slight variation in the color as the more and more we look at it. It gives us a sense that there's more than meets the eye at first glance, which is, I think, a big part of what Mondrian was trying to do, is create something that appears uber simple, and yet, like Rothko and a lot of other abstract painters, the more you see it, the more you have an experience of just pure looking, which is what they were after. Really cool. I like that a lot. Great job, Maria. Here's Gemini. Again, I love that you used the square format, which is really what a lot of abstract painters went to the square format, because the square format is neither landscape format or portrait format, right? Because, right, like here's the girl with the pearl earring that we did 2 years ago, January 18th, right? 2021. So, you know, here's portrait format. Do I have a landscape around here? Yeah, I got it, right? This is the Monet that we did more recently. So you got portrait format and landscape format. And abstract painters decided, well, if I want to make a painting that is essentially trying to be totally abstract, or what one might call non-representational or non-objective painting, then I can't use a portrait format, because no matter what, people are going to think it's a portrait of something. And I can't use a landscape format because people are going to say it's a landscape, even though it's trying to be just shapes. So they started really embracing the square, or circles, or other kinds of shapes. There's an artist named Frank Stella, an American artist. I think he's still alive. He's definitely in his maybe 90s, but he's also very famous for doing very wildly shaped canvases. And then you might have someone like Sol LeWitt, who died recently. I think he was probably about 100 years old, who just painted directly onto the walls. And these huge abstract compositions, probably inspired a lot by Mondrian, who just broke out of the canvas entirely. And he wasn't the first one to paint on a wall or murals. We've been doing that since we were living in caves a million years ago. But that idea of like, the rectangular canvas, square canvas, it's not enough. Shaped canvases, that's still not enough. What if we go to the right onto the wall? Sorry, I missed Dolores's much smaller version in watercolor and gouache on watercolor. What I think is really kind of neat about this is, you know, this must be a very small little painting considering the weave that we see here below. But I think there's something also nice about it mounted, or at least just sitting on the canvas for the photograph. This is something we see a lot, is artists mounting drawings onto paper. In fact, a lot of like Warhol prints, silkscreen prints, were done on paper, probably a heavier, like a watercolor paper, or probably more likely a printmaking paper, which is very similar, and then mounted onto canvas so that they became not drawings or prints, but paintings, right? And that's, it sounds ridiculous, but within art circles, there's constant kind of tension between painters and printmakers and drawers and illustrators and all sorts and sorts. But anyway, I think that turned out really cool. I love seeing this here, Susan. It's cool seeing them side by side. I also like that you took a little bit of liberty with this painting and used some other colors in here, because if I recall, I think I must have put mine away. I don't remember this particular blue. This is a much cooler blue than I think he painted in here, because his was much more warmer blue, like you've got here. So I think that's, again, really interesting little innovations everyone's doing. And then Paula's Piet Mondrian. He was sitting in a different restaurant in New York City, looking down at a different view. And I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that, Paula, but I guess it kind of does look like maybe he's looking out the window down onto the street below. Is that sort of what you're thinking? Because it does have like it looks a little bit like a map, right? And you know, if we were to think about New York City, you could think of these as like the streets, and maybe this is Central Park or something, right? Because it is sort of an anomalous shape in the middle of all of the busy streets in Manhattan. So that turned out really cool. I mean, obviously, if we wanted to get closer to Mondrian's actual style, would be maybe to go back over top of some of this white with some yellow, you know, just as Mondrian did, very slow, time-consuming brushstrokes, which I think I see you've done some pretty, like, clean black lines here. I wonder how you did that, but it looks great. you know, again, I'm always up for some type of innovation when people do these paintings, because I think it's fun to maybe use this as an opportunity to be a little bit playful. Wow, and also a bunch of new faces in the chat there too. Or Red Angry Bird. We've got a bunch of emojis there. Nice to see you. Oh, and there's Holly. That's great to see you in the chat. Sorry, this is Pascal's version of an early Mondrian. And what's fascinating, I think we talked about in this episode, is Mondrian's famous series of paintings abstracting a tree. And it's kind of funny because Eleanor also seems to have been attracted to that era of Mondrian's work, which is this period where he's experimenting with cubism and then very quickly sort of goes off in his own direction, and you know, starts doing the paintings he's much more renowned for. So I don't know if Mondrian used these pinks and blues before off the top of my head, but again, fun little innovation on there. And with Eleanor's, I've been wanting to do a cubist painting using these same sort of browns and grays, and just haven't been able to get to it just yet. But there is a couple Georges Braque paintings coming down the pipeline shortly, so it's cool to see a little bit of a tease to give us an idea of what that type of painting could look like. And there is our Stuart Davis. So let's keep on going. Okay. So this is the Paraskeva Clark, right? Painting. I'm trying to remember how to pronounce her first name. The Christmas tree that we did shortly before Christmas is kind of a little Christmas treat here. And here's Eleanor's version. I think you've given a little better hook for that guitar than either myself or Clark did in her own. And I think also I remember I removed the heater on the back there, so it's you also did that too. Looks great. I think this works really well. I like seeing the different variations in color on this back wall. I see a little bit of some oranges and yellows and purples, and that just helps to give that wall really nice kind of texture and depth. And here's Heidi's version, and painted it as a card and then mailed it out. That is awesome. I love seeing your art in action. That is very inspiring. I also like that you took a few innovations here. You from these lights that were, I think, just they were kind of like a blue. I think that's pretty close to the way they were. I like that you added more color to it. You even sort of brightened up the floor. I like this little cat that you've added over top of it. That's pretty cool. That's awesome. Oh, and there looks like there was a cat underneath here, but it got covered up by the thanks. Oh, poor cat. Cat got covered. I guess the cat made another appearance over here, right? That's cool. And then here's Paula's version. You're always surprising me, Paula. You took speaking of like Rothko and Mondrian using different shapes and orientations of canvases. Here again, a landscape-oriented canvas that you've the original is landscape oriented, but you've chosen to paint it horizontally in portrait format. And what's kind of interesting about this is, whoops, by painting it like that, it certainly changes this painting quite a lot. Like, now it feels like it's the end of a hallway. In a way, it sort of reminds me, the first thing that occurs to me is Stanley Kubrick's movie The Shining, where those very famous scenes of the interior of this large hotel in the middle of winter, and the little boy riding his tricycle around the hallways, and it's a scary movie. But there's the way that you've painted this, especially with this gray carpet, you know, kind of leading us directly in towards that Christmas tree. It creates a lot of depth, and this is really great use of leading lines. And we see this more often in photography these days, but you've used those same sort of concepts in this painting, where all of these lines, which are there in the original, but you've really dramatized this scene, because I think a lot of other people would have done something very different, might have made this Christmas tree much larger, and instead you've made it smaller, and really it only takes up just over a third of the painting versus being the central subject. So you've made the floor over half the subject of this painting. Really interesting little innovation there. I love seeing that. Again, Paula, it looks like it was the only person that did the DeFeo painting, which, as I've mentioned before, is, you know, I'm a huge DeFeo fan, and at the end of each painting session, after as I'm wrapping up, I just take all my excess paint and then put it onto the canvas that we began back in, this would have been, what, late November, and I'm just going to allow it to slowly build. It's still a little bit wet because there's a lot of thick paint on here from a lot of different painting sessions, including a little bit of that rotten yellow paint from yesterday. Yum, 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 yum. But I think as that dries, one hopes that that smell will go away. Anyway, I love that you tackled this here in your sketchbook again with that thick paint. Oops. And wow, that's cool. It looks like you've used either a palette knife. Yeah, a palette knife. I was going to say maybe the which, you know, to get some of those other kind of finer points, you could use the backside. I'll just use a bigger brush. The backside of a paintbrush to make lines, which we did just the other day with Marc Chagall, right? There's artists will use whatever tools you can to get the marks that you want. Cool. I like all these textures. I like all the color that's underneath it, right? And that's a big part of the way DeFeo painted. It's just this constant build-up of more and more paint and color. Great. Once again, kudos to you for doing a painting like that, Paula. Okay, so let's move on here, and we're going to look at the art of JMW Turner, and this is the burning of the Houses of Parliament. And so here's Josh's version, and then he also included one of it framed, which is cool. I strongly encourage you to hang your art in your house, put it on a shelf, mantelpiece, wherever. Get your art up in view of yourself and your family and your friends. Take it to one of your favorite paintings, take them to work, put them on your desk at your office, and start sharing this thing that you've been doing over the past maybe few months or few years, or maybe you've been painting for a while and just recently joined the community. Take those paintings out of the house, out of your storage, off, and share them with people, because I think that's the beginning. When we start kind of really sharing our art, our sort of sense of self, our identity also starts to change. The way people look at us starts to change, and I also think it inspires other people to take that same leap that you have, right? I know it might feel like, oh, I don't know if I want my coworkers to know that I've been experimenting with painting. What if they think it's bad? Trust me, most people want to be making art but are afraid to do it. You guys are doing it. By sharing it, people are like, oh, you made that? And you're like, oh yeah, I just started painting over the past few months, and I watch this stuff on YouTube and make a painting once or twice a week. And they're like, Really? I've always thought about doing that. Like how, and then, yeah, maybe it brings an extra viewer or two for my channel, which is great from my own selfish point of view, but from, as I've mentioned many, many times, the more art that you guys are making, or the more art that humanity is making, I think the better world that we'll ultimately live in, right? Because I think art is one of the best ways to express our feelings and emotions. Anyway, big tangent there. Josh, great job here. Let's take a look at a few more paintings, recreations here. Here's Paula's version and Vanya's. Wow. Wow. Okay, so how about let's go back up to Joshua's just really quickly. I think this turned out really great, Joshua. The one thing I would say is I love all of the red down here. I think that we just want to maybe even darken a little bit more. Kind of like what you've done down here is just pushing that contrast just a little bit more. Because the more contrast you have, the more it's going to make the flames feel hot and burning. And because, you know, it's the difference between, if you've ever lit let's say a campfire in the day, you know, like I've done lots of camping, and sometimes you get to your campsite and somebody sets up the tent while somebody gets the fire going, and the fire burning in the day with a lot of light looks very different than that same campfire burning once the sun goes down and it's the only thing you can see, right? And I think one of the spectacles that Turner was really trying to communicate with this painting is it was dark, but that fire was so intense that it was lighting up the sky. So getting a little bit more of a darker values into the sky and even in the water will accentuate that contrast and make it more dramatic, right? We've talked about like how artists use strong contrast between light and dark to increase the drama of a scene, like Rembrandt, Caravaggio, to maybe a lesser extent Leonardo, Da Vinci, and some of the other Renaissance painters, but using strong contrast in either value or color can really push those things. I mean, I would say the same thing here, Paula. I mean, I love these colors. I love these oranges and reds and even this kind of pinks and purples up here. But this also looks a little bit more like a daytime view. Not that that's a bad thing. I'm just thinking, but we want to punch it up just a little bit. Don't be afraid to go darker, right? I think, so here Vanya is, I think, really pushing it. And you can really see how warm this fire now really starts to feel. Like, whoa. Because we've got bright yellows and white next to some grays and dark purples and this sort of much muddier sky. So great job, Vanya, for kind of you're helping me with this example. So this turned out really, really well. I'm very proud of you for this too, and it's really nice reflection in the water. I mean, I love the way you've done the sky and these sort of the flames flickering up and these sort of ambers that are floating away, and but I think the water ultimately is the strongest part, and it really, you know, these figures that are along the water, right? You can almost feel the warmth on their faces as they stand there. Whoa, what's going on, right? Let's just look here. Joshua included another one here. This is another painting. This was in the Dropbox folder. We just didn't have a time to paint it. Another very famous Turner painting, the fire on this famous boat, or not the fire. The Fighting Tamarine was this like famous British boat that was being scrapped, and so there's all sorts of things going on in this painting of like an old, like the sadness of this once heroic boat now being towed into harbor to be dismantled, and of course the way Turner painted it was sort of yet very dramatic, even though it's sort of like this, you know, kind of sad and uneventful kind of moment, right? At least in outward appearances here. And there's Sophia joined the chat here. Great to see you too, Sophia. Awesome. Okay, so let's keep on moving here. So, this is David Milne. We looked at David Milne shortly before Christmas, I think. Well, I'm not sure what date that's. Oh, that's the date that he put on there. There, December 21st. So, and again, here's Paula's version. I like this a lot, Paula. This is a little bit different approach to the painting than I think he did. But I you know, obviously, you don't usually use the templates. You always draw everything out on your own, and so that puts you in a little bit of a, one might say, a disadvantage to everyone else. But when you do that, it also gives you a lot of opportunity to take some creative liberties here. So I really like how the colors you've got here. There's a lot of depth in this painting. Like some of the colors back here, it really feels like this forest just continues quite far on, and we're just seeing the edge of the forest at the water. These are really great reflections. Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would say is because these trees are pretty solid and dark, I think we'd want to have a little bit more of that down below. Like, so for instance, this tree still looks like it, you know, based upon like the style, that it still has its leaves on it, right? We've got this sort of encircling form, which is something artists tend to do to kind of suggest the fullness of the tree and the volume of the leaves on the branches. And yet down below, it looks like a tree that's lost its leaves. And similar to a slightly less extent down here, we still have this outlining kind of membrane that we have up here, but it we see areas where the sky is coming through this membrane, I guess you could call it, right? So there's what is interesting, and I'm not saying that you have to change it, because something like this would lead me as a viewer to look at that and go, well, if I take it as a fact that this was created exactly the way the artist wanted it to be done, then there's some sort of disconnect here where we have maybe spring up here and then maybe fall or winter down here, right? Even with this white reflection, maybe that's some snow that's just in the, that appears to be on the shoreline but isn't actually. So there's the potential that we have two seasons collapsed into one painting. And at Emily Carr, the university I teach at, we talk about different ways that artists can show the passing of time and movement, and this is one strategy of having multiple periods of time collaged into one. And this is also a technique that someone like René Magritte, who we'll look at here shortly, used. He didn't, I don't think, we didn't talk about it in his paintings, but he did use that effect a number of times, where he might have, let's say, a nighttime scene with like a street light on and the houses are all dark, but the sky is noon and it's bright, right? And you're looking at like, that doesn't make any sense. It's surrealism. So anyway, there's, again, something like that. I don't know what your intention was, but one might say it could be quote unquote wrong, or a really interesting door that you've opened for yourself. We'll just move on here. There's a couple more Milne paintings. I didn't do this painting myself, but a few of you did, which is always really exciting. That's why I put a few extra sometimes in the Dropbox, just seeing, because if people aren't really interested in the one that we're doing, then at least there's something else that you could do, right? So this is soldiers, Canadian soldiers that are sort of milling around London, or maybe it's not London, but it's like a small town near where the army base that they were stationed was. So, you know, it's all these soldiers on their day off, you know, go into town and go have a few drinks and chat up all the ladies and get into some trouble, and before they go back to the front lines, kind of thing. And I really like this painting, and it's really cool to see a few people tackling it. So we've got Maria's and Paula's here. Again, Paula, I love the way that you interpret these. You know, this one here, the way, because we don't have more houses articulated in the background, it makes it feel like an even smaller village that just has, you know, as you know, there's places like this all over the world where you might have one road that snakes through a small town, and there might be a number of commercial buildings along that small road, but there's really nothing in behind it, right? Everything is just on that road. Versus, let's say here with Maria's version, we see a town where there's more, you know, beyond the storefronts, right? Here's where all the people live, and so again, there's nothing wrong with this version. It just tells us a different story, right? It also looks, just the way that you've painted it, like potentially these are smaller people, maybe even younger people, because we have some of these figures here are this height, and then we have some people that are further away that are actually either the same height or maybe even a little bit bigger. And that might, like, for me, I see these two and this person here as being like adults with a bunch of little kids kind of on a field trip or something. Which, again, nothing wrong with a painting of little kids going on a field trip. It just changes the way that I look at the painting. I want to say too, Maria, one thing I like about the way that you painted this is really taking Milne's style to heart and allowing yourself to leave all of, like, to do a pretty dry brush technique and leaving all these gaps between the lines, right? That's textbook David Milne style, which is not everybody's cup of tea, but it is a pretty challenging thing to do, because it's really hard to just leave a painting like this. The painting kind of might look to some people as being unfinished, and, you know, I think David Milne might have seen that as his own sort of approach to, like, Impressionism, right? People said the same thing about Impressionism. It doesn't look finished, it just looks like an impression of a haystack, right? It doesn't look like and Monet would be like, oh, I like that, an impression of a haystack. Yeah, I think that's more what I was going for. I don't really care about all of the straw and everything in hay in these haystacks and articulating that in a photorealistic way. I want all we need, and all I'm really interested in, is the color, right? And so here we have David Milne, who is approaching the painting in a, not the same way, but in a variation of that, in that maybe it's not so much the color, but it's the values, or like the color contrasts, or the line that he wants to preserve. Anyway, I could go down the rabbit hole on any of these paintings. So this is very cool. Great job, you guys. Let's move on here. Let's look at Robert, Indiana. And there's I put two versions of this in the Dropbox, and it's, again, cool to see a few different versions of this. And right, so here's the actual Dropbox image, and then here's the one that we did in the class together. And I did two versions, one with tape and one without. And I think ultimately the one that I used tape with, I felt better. It's hanging in the living room. My wife likes it, so that's usually a good sign. But let's start here with Rachel. I painted on a laminate sample from the countertop store, because that's what was at hand. I love this. I love the idea of using whatever materials and surfaces you have to make a painting, right? If we think of, like, Maud Lewis, who, you know, the famous folk art painter, Canadian folk art painter. She painted the entire, every square inch of the interior of her small home, right? So much so that the entire house is on display in is it Halifax? Or no, yeah, the Nova Scotia Museum of Art I think it's in Halifax, or is it? Maybe. I'm not exactly. I'm trying to remember where it is, but the whole house is inside the museum. It's not a big house, and it's hard to believe 2 people lived in that house. But again, if you don't have a canvas sitting around, that shouldn't be an excuse to not make art, right? Yeah, just keep on going. Paint on whatever's available. You know, if you've had something sitting around for a while and you've been looking for a use for it, like maybe one day it would be cool to, I've got all these old bottles. What if I made a painting on an old wine bottle? That could be like, imagine doing a painting like this on an old wine bottle. Or I mean, there's artists I just saw over there with my daughter's teddy bears. Imagine doing a painting like this on an old teddy bear. One of my mentors, an artist named Mike Kelly, did a whole bunch of art using teddy bears and dolls, and he didn't really paint on them, but what's to stop you? Anyway, long story short, let's move on. Actually, let me just see. You know, first of all, I think this turned out really well. The lines, you know, it looks almost like there's some black lines in between here. I don't know if that's what's actually there, or it's just when we put the, let's say, red and it goes over top of this green, it starts to look black. When we put the blue over top of the red, or vice versa, it creates a little bit of a black, it looks like a black line, even though it's not there. And I can imagine some of you may have encountered this while working on this painting, and that might be like, that really drives me crazy. But it's a good thing just to remember and to take that experience, put it in your back pocket so that you can pull it back out if need be at some point and be like, hey, you know what? Instead of me trying to spend all day with my little paintbrush trying to do little black lines, what if I just paint this, you know, blue, and I paint red, and I just paint a little bit over top of my blue lines, and I got black lines all of a sudden, right? So what might appear to be a mistake in one painting is a lifesaver in another painting. Paula's version here. That's cool. It's interesting, Paula, that you decided against that big bright yellow and seeing that was on the top and the bottom. And so seeing it like this without it kind of changes this painting for me, right? We see this big bright yellow there, or in May's version here. Without it, it definitely feels maybe less celebratory of a painting. It has a little bit more of a muted, you know, that yellow is kind of like a bright, happy, sunshine yellow. Without it, it might make this painting feel a little bit more melancholy, right? Again, you know, often when I talk about stuff like this, my interpretations of paintings, people are like, oh my goodness, that's so like, you're really making a lot out of nothing. Maybe. But I think it's worth sort of thinking about how will people interpret your work, because you're not always going to be standing right next to it and people go like, oh, this painting is about, you know, let's say this painting is about the impossibility of love in the digital age, and you're like, are you kidding me? No, it's celebrating love. And some of you are like, yeah, maybe. But that's not what I feel from it. And so then your responsibility as an artist is to go like, everyone keeps looking at this painting and saying one thing about it that I did not intend. And then you have to say to yourself, well, even though everyone sees it this way, and I did not intend it to be seen that way, am I okay with that? Or that's not what I want at all, so I gotta maybe make a change to it, or or make a different version of it that does align with my intention more closely. And I just think that that's really something that, as you start going on and making other art on your own, something to think about. Like, if everyone keeps on getting it wrong and it's frustrating you, is maybe your intention's not coming across exactly the way you want. And again, I have no idea what your intention was, Paula, but that's how I interpret it, right? So here's May's version. That's cool, May. That's it. This looks like it was all hand painted, and that looks like it took some time, and you pulled it off. Looks great. Even, this green has a little bit more white in it than originally, which I don't mind. It's almost like that. If I recall, when I was painting that green, I think I had to paint it a couple times because I was having I think I might have painted it too dark or too bright, or one of the other. And because, again, when you're painting a painting that only has like 3 or 4 colors, then it's like making a dinner where you've only got 3 things on the plate, as opposed to having, a Thanksgiving dinner where you got 50 different dishes and all sorts of sauces and everything. If somebody doesn't like this little thing, well, there's 10 or other things that you can have. You got 4 things on the plate. They all got to kind of work, right? So sometimes that more minimalist approach that we often see in abstract painting, while some people are like, my kid could do that, it's like, well, I don't know. It's pretty hard to pull off a painting where there's not a lot extra going on. So here's Eleanor's. I love how this turned out, Eleanor. It looks like there's a little bit of a darker color underneath poking through there. I don't mind that so much. I think we talked about your signature, and I think some of your more recent paintings, you've modified the color of your signature as well, which is really cool to see. Someone taking my advice. So, but that's cool. It looks really nice. I mean, again, like, if I was to do this painting and I was to sign it like that, rather than using black, using something, what color would I do? Because my first instinct was like maybe an orange or something, but then it's a different color than he actually used in this painting. So maybe it would be... Would it be red or blue? I don't know. You guys let me know, or let Eleanor know what you think that, or is black fine? Maybe some people are like, I have no idea what you're talking about, Michael. It looks great the way it is. Here's Paula's version of the alternate love painting that was in the Dropbox. It was actually a sculpture that we were going to paint, and again, you're not using the template, and you drew all this out. Pretty complex shape to draw in perspective like that, Paula, and you did a pretty darn good job. Better than I think most people could do. So that turned out really, really well. And you really got some of the darker, shadowy areas really well. Same thing, Joshua. That looks awesome. Great job. Really impressed with the way that you did this, Joshua. And it's it's a little hard to. I keep wanting to kind of look at it at a different angle because of the reflections on there. But yeah, I don't think I have anything advice to offer. I like that there's probably a darker color under here, which you've layered over in both aspects of the background. You almost sort of just leave a little bit of a gap there, and it creates that separation, that line. The one thing that appears is that line in the horizon seems to dip down. It could just be the way it's photographed, but it almost seems like this line, if it was to come, it would be a little bit lower. So I don't know. Maybe that's just an optical illusion, but I love this Gemini. Got to play with my Xmas gift golden so flat zing collection. Look at those colors. Interesting. I'm not aware of that line of golden paint, the so flat paint. I'm assuming what that would be is like a hyper matte paint. You know, it does what I think is, this reminds me a lot of like posters from the 1960s. These really psychedelic colors, you know, you see of like Bob Dylan and Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix. And so there's there are some interesting colors here. Like this green is like a very saturated, almost fluorescent kind of color, right? It's definitely a modern synthetic pigment. And then this pink and purple, really interesting color combination. I'd be interested to know where it occurred to you to use those three colors for this, or four, including the blue in the front, because that's really wild. The one thing I would say is, let's say if we look at Josh, whoa, what happened here? You can see on the front here, we've got these kind of clearly defined edges on the L and the V that we don't have here. So it gives the impression that that this just curls around. That these are round edges as opposed to harder edges. Like you see how right here that looks like a corner, whereas here we don't really have a corner. So, but I mean, it is interesting that you did that, because I would then assume that these sides would have to be a slightly different blue. And also you didn't do that down there or here. Or in that E. Interesting. I think that E. But anyway, I'm always nitpicking on everything. Very cool. Very, very cool. Yeah, Rachel says it's the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia in Halifax. Kathy says, yes, it's in Halifax. It's incredible to see. Yes, she was a great artist. We did do an episode on Maud Lewis. We did a couple great paintings of hers that turned out really, really well. And that was before we started the master study class. That was in the Intro to Painting course that I think it's like 40 episodes that I did 2 years ago or more. So if you're exhausted all 200 master study episodes, there's another 40 that we did before that, if you want to. So here's what we did for Boxing Day. I know, I got that dad sense of humor. This is the George Bellows Dempsey and Firpo painting, and Paula was the only one to do this painting, as far as I know. This one took longer than I expected, and even by the time I finished it, I was still feeling like I could have spent another couple of hours working on it, just because of a lot of the detail in the crowd. You know, often if there is more than one person in a painting, it almost sort of doubles the length of time that is required to work on a painting, just because you've got often a face can take, even myself, maybe an hour or two, and so if you got two faces, then you're looking at maybe 2.5, 3, 4 hours. You got 5, 6, and then it just, so that's one of the reasons why I try to limit myself, like, because there's some, like, for instance, Rembrandt, who's one of my favorite artists of all time. A lot of his most famous paintings are these huge paintings where there's like 20 people gathered together, like the famous Night Watch painting in Amsterdam at the Rijksmuseum is an amazing, iconic painting. That would take, we'd have to devote a whole month of episodes to that single painting to finish that. Anyway, I think this turned out great, Paula. Once again, I'm just amazed that you do all these just by drawing it out by eye. That's cool. I mean, little things like, I suppose, getting up a little bit closer to these ropes on the boxing ring might be kind of nice. Does it bother me? And do you need to fix it, quote unquote? I don't know. It doesn't, definitely makes it feel more spontaneous. Like, so for instance, it looks like you drew all of that out and then painted around the ropes, whereas I just painted the whole background all at once and then painted the ropes on afterwards, so that I could have a very continuous, like, fade gradient in behind here. So you've just chosen a different approach. I don't know if, I wouldn't say it's a bad approach or worse than mine, or mine was better or anything. It's just different. We get a different effect because it's very next to impossible to create a, you know, a successful gradient going from, let's say, dark to light, where these lights are, when it's broken into these different sort of stained glass window like partitions, right? But it does present the possibility of doing something a little bit different, which is to maybe even paint all of these almost like in a Mondrian way. I mean, I could see someone doing a George Bellows Dempsey Furpo painting in the style of Mondrian, right? I don't know, hint hint, maybe Pascal or Joshua. I could see doing something wild like that. Okay, so next up here, we're going to look at René Magritte, and we got a lot of paintings by Margritte here. It looked like that was quite a popular one. So where should we start? I'm going to just get my tea out here. So, I believe this is a painting by Lolly from the Instagram page. Lolly, who's been painting along with me, or at least in the chat, been very vocal in the chat for the past while. And I think, let me know, Lolly, I see you there in the chat. Is this in fact your painting? Let's take a look at that. And then here's Paula's, Sandra's, and here's this the same, it looks like two versions of it. Okay, so let's look at this one here. I think this looks great. That's awesome. Holy smokes. That is great. This turned out really good. So these are yours. Okay, this is great, Lolly. Finally, everyone's like, yes, we finally... Lolly's been talking about it. I'm too embarrassed in my art to share it. I don't want anybody to see it. Nothing's turned out. Well, if they turned out as well as the few that you sent me via Instagram have, then I think you should be much, much less hard on yourself than you already are. This turned out great. Look at that. You got the reflection on here really well. These turn out really good. This is, you know, what's, you know, again, this is the type of painting that some people would say is really, really easy. Then when we do it, it's a little bit tricky, but it's also, because there's not much more than just a pipe on this canvas, it really allows us to focus on building these skills of blending to try to create that dimension in an artwork. And not only that, your brush control to do the line work is amazing, right? I've done a lot of painting little text over the course of my life, and it's not easy to do. And so whenever I see something like that, I'm like, wow, that's really, really well done. Really good. So great job, Lolly. We're really excited to see some of your art now. That's great. I think that for a while people were wondering, is Lolly actually making something here, or what's going on? So it's proof that you've been up to something. Here's Paula's version. One thing I love, Paula, again, is how you've layered up this background. We've got some yellow, and then it looks like you got the blue, and then the white over top. And so all of those layers of paint add to that level of complexity. Donna says, what does that say in English? Ceci n'est pas un pipe is, this is not a pipe, right, is the English translation. And this painting is called The Treachery of Images. I think we did a whole episode devoted to this specific painting. And just long story short, the idea behind the painting is Magritte just pointing out that this is not a pipe. It's a painting of a pipe, but it's just blobs of colored mud on a piece of fabric, right? Which, you know, kind of sounds obvious, but it's the idea like, hey, all of the images you see around you, they're all lies. Everything is all, like, you see a photograph, right? Like, you could even do, like, this is not a woman. This is not a little girl wearing an earring. This is mud on a canvas, right? And that was a lot of what artists were thinking about at the time. Remember, around this time that Magritte makes this painting, you have the rise of fascism around the world, especially in Germany, and Hitler is like trying to overthrow the world order, and you have propaganda is being broadcast all over the world from Germany, and sort of like what's going on from Russia and Putin right now, blasting the world with all of this false propaganda. And so Magritte is just, in a very playful way on the surface, trying to tell us, like, don't believe everything you see or you read, right? This is, you know, 100, almost 90 years ago that he made this painting, which bears even more relevance to the time we live in now, where we're constantly faced with what, you know, like fake news and photoshopped images. Anyway, long story short, great job, Paul. This looks really nice. You got the highlight going on in there and the roundness of that shape. Well done. One thing I would say, if we're going to write text like this, is maybe draw like a little line underneath with the ruler, just to help you keep the text straight. If you want, it's not, just because it's not straight doesn't make it bad. But if your goal is to try to kind of create the look that, let's say, Lolly got here, is just using some tools to help you that you might be able to erase. Like, another thing you could do is literally just take some tape, and I might even have done this in the painting, is just take a little bit of tape and maybe place it below, and then you can write out these words, and maybe even, let's say, the bottoms of these P's might overlap over top of the tape. And so you paint everything else out, and then you peel the tape off, and then just finish the P's underneath. And that way you get everything goes along a nice straight line. And the other thing that you can do as well, like, so for instance, that just crashed, but let me see. I'll just show. You know, if I was wanting to do this, there we go, right, let me just get a bigger pen. So let's say this was my canvas, you know, I could literally, and I want it to be right here, I could write this down, oops, and I know how to speak French, I don't know why I just spelt that wrong, but, and so you could write it down, and that also, not only can you use this top line as your straight edge, but you can also see if the text fits, and we got some space for all those letters, because it looks a little bit like, you know, we got jammed up here between these two words. Again, not a big deal, but just thought I'd mention that if that's something that you want to work on, and you want to get, if you're wanting to do more text. Or this doesn't even have to apply for doing text. Like, so for instance, like, let's say we were trying to do the girl with the pearl earring here, right? And, you know, you could do something, let's say, like, put this tape, you could put it right on here, or even just on your table, and you could say, okay, that's where the eye is going to go. It's, you know, and this is the chin, that's the hairline, so that if you're working on your painting and you really get lost, or you have a tendency to get lost and you lose all the facial features, you can then go, Okay, well that's where the eye line is. So those eyes got to go there because you're like, do I do it here or here? Well, you've got some marks to help you, right? So you can use tape as to not just do straight-edged lines like we've used it for, like the Mondrian, for instance, but you can use it as a guideline to help you when writing text, etc. Okay, let's continue on here. Sandra's. I'm wondering, is there a difference here between these two? Is it just the way it's photographed? I think it's the same painting, but it does look different. Obviously, the yellow is much more pronounced here. It's also, you've taken out the text on the bottom here, which is, again, one of the things that you can do when you're painting. I mean, and I encourage you to play. I mean, someone could put a different text in here. You could translate it into English and paint it there. You could translate it into, I don't know, Japanese, and write Japanese characters in here, right? And that could be, so you can customize any of these paintings to suit yourself, as some of you have done by adding fun little details into the, I think maybe I'm not sure if it's in today's episode or in a future one, because there's some very fun stuff coming down the pipeline where you guys have really played with things. So how about let's look at the Son of Man painting here. So we didn't do this in class. This is another thing that was in the Dropbox folder. And it's funny, there's a number of you who took this painting up. So here we have Eleanor's version. We got Paula's. And then Sandra, was documenting everything. So we have this painting in process here. Oh, I might be a little out of order. Oh, there, it didn't load them in. Okay, so that's very weird. Where's the final one? I think that's one of these is the final one. That looks like the final one. It must be the final one. Anyway, so here's the final Sandra one. Which number is that? That's number 9B, I think. And then we've got Paula's and Eleanor's. Wow. I mean, what a bizarre painting. What an interesting character René Magritte was. And this is a pretty iconic image that he created. He used this a number of times, including even using this in photographs. Like, he would take photographs with an apple in front of his face. Again, I'm not even sure he necessarily knew what he was doing. Part of what surrealism, often artists would base images based on dreams, based on like using different games to just create an image really quickly, and then after you've created it is to think about what it means. So when I was talking about an artist making an artwork, and then you show it to people and they're like, the way that I feel about it is this, and you're like, no, that's not what it's about. Magritte was kind of the artist who would, and other surrealists who would make a painting and have really no idea what they were creating, and until they showed to somebody, and somebody's like, oh, that looks like it's an allegory for what could someone say, like the way that behind, like, humans are always engineering nature, and so an apple is no longer an apple anymore, it's a human construction. I don't know, I'm just pulling stuff out of thin air, but all of a sudden we start creating, and so Magritte be like, oh, I kind of like that, that's kind of weird, that's strange, okay, I like that, yeah. So it offers an opportunity for us to play as viewers, and it also turns the viewer into an essential part of the creation of the artwork as a creator themselves, because they have to make meaning out of a bunch of disparate concepts and ideas, right? And sometimes people don't like that. Sometimes people want to be fed something and be told what they're looking at, or what to think even, right? And then sometimes we like to have that freedom to make up our own minds and to create our own reactions to things. And you know, it's like just the other day I just watched that movie Power of the Dog, right? And that's a movie that is kind of weird and strange, and the whole time you're watching it, it's like, what is this movie about? What a weird movie. And then you get to the end, like, oh, interesting. But I still don't really know what I just saw. These are all turned out really great. So Sandra, I think you did a fantastic job here. It looks like it took you some time, like, to get this to be as kind of sharp and clean. You know, everything is really well kind of delineated, like from, like, say, the hat from the background, the collar on this shirt, and the tie, the leaf, like. So that, to do that kind of thing is very time consuming, and I think we'll see a few more paintings like this that you've worked on for a while that, you know, I applaud your attention to detail, because it's almost beyond my level of patience. And that's why you're making huge murals and I'm not, right? Because you have a lot more patience than I do. Here's Paula's version of the same thing. You know what's funny, Paula? The way that you've painted this actually sort of makes it look like he's wearing like a clown nose. I don't know. Maybe it's because we can see his lips. I don't know if we can. We can't really see much of his face in the original painting, I don't think. Like, we don't really see his mouth. We just sort of the corners of his eyes. So the apple just seems to be sort of floating strangely in front of him. Whereas in yours, Paula, it takes on a bit of a clown aspect here. Again, a little bit of a slightly different interpretation that really is only the result of seeing a little bit more of these irises in the corners of the mouth. Like, I find that really, really interesting, how a one or little brushstroke more can quite radically change the interpretation a viewer can have on the artwork. Well, he says, it's a great idea when you're struggling with a portrait, just throw an apple in there and say it's inspired by Margritte. Absolutely, right? Or even rather than just an apple, it could be something else entirely of your own interest, right? Maybe it's a teddy bear, or it's a cat, you know, just floating in the air. Or you decide, you know what, I didn't do the face so well, so I'm just going to paint a cat's head here, right? And then it's like, then that becomes really weird and strange, and then before you know it, you're doing a bunch of cats and dogs sitting around a poker table. Which is a painting I have on my list, is eventually I want to get to the cats and dogs playing poker. In fact, I'm sure I have it written down, but that's one of the things. Because it is a pretty fun, iconic type of a painting. Anyway, let's move on. So there's a few more Magritte paintings here to look at. And so here's the family, or the Great Family. And this one I think turned out really, really well. I was really happy with this one. It was maybe a little bit complicated for some people, understandably so, because, you know, we're painting, there's a lot of things going on in this painting of the sky and potentially using tape. I don't know if we've done too many cloud paintings. Okay, so maybe let's start here with Charmai's. That is awesome, Charmai. Wow. I don't know if you used tape either. So to do this without using tape and to get pretty sharp edges without it, that's pretty tricky too, right? That's pretty good. And the water down here, like, I don't know what is better, these beautiful clouds and this little bit of the light coming in. We see this nice gradient from above, or the water. I don't know, maybe it's the water that is the most successful part. I mean, that's a great thing to have when you finish a painting, is like, there's a lot of great stuff going on. Very cool. That should be, I mean, you've made a lot of great stuff, Charmaine, but that is definitely up there with one of the better ones. Vanya here. So, what is this yellow? Is that tape, or is that the yellow paint underneath it? I am not sure what I'm looking at here. I don't know if you're in the chat there, Vanya, but I don't know. Oh, this is my first time using tape. So it looks like somehow I'm not sure how that would have happened. How would that have happened? Oh, I suspect what might have happened is, again, is maybe you painted just the bird. You put the tape on, but maybe put the tape a little bit too far, and then when you cut it, of course you won't know what that tape looks like until you peel it off, and then you peel it off and saw that there was some of that yellow, which I think is one of the reasons when I painted this. I think I painted this, put the sky quite far over the edges of my original pencil line, so much so that I might even have lost a little bit of that. But again, that this might be a little bit frustrating. It was probably a little bit, disappointing at the moment you peeled that tape off and saw that there was some of that yellow residue of that first layer of paint under. But it was probably one of the better learning experiences, because you'd probably go like, oh, next time I do this, I'll just paint a little bit beyond the edges so that if I make a mistake, it doesn't show up. So again, that's just, every painting is a learning experience. And by the way, these waves down here also turned out really, really well. So there's a lot of great things going on in this painting. And I'd also say that maybe that yellow kind of works. It kind of adds another layer of bizarreness that Mondrian or Magritte was going for. Oh, wow, and here's Sandra's. That turned out pretty cool, Sandra. Yeah, I wonder, that looks, there must have been a little bit of tape there, perhaps, I think there's some tape in there. But really nice, again, really great contrast between the sky and the two skies, because there's sky inside the shape and outside. I think also the water turned out really, really well. The one thing that you may want to think about adding, I love seeing your setup here, and all of these, those are cool, those little mushrooms, is I think if you look here at Charmaine's, because she did a fantastic job, is look at how she sort of got some kind of curling lines in the water to show like the wave wrapping up and under. And I know it sounds pretty obvious here, but water does tend to do a little bit of that. So here, your wave, you can see waves that do this, and you live down there in Southern California. I'm sure you've been to the beach more than a few times. So this to me looks like it's a bigger wave, but it's not a destructive wave. It's not a big giant wave. So it feels maybe more like a calm nighttime wave rolling in. Whereas I think if we look at Charmaine's here, this wave is like, I feel more like I'm in a boat in the middle of the ocean, and this wave is rushing towards me, and that wave is going to rock the boat kind of thing, right? So just those little tiny things can maybe affect the way that we experience that art. Here's Paula's. That turned out great, Paula. I like, we've got a little bit lighter down here, that the light from the horizon coming through. I would even think about the sky could be darkened even more, right? Like if we look at some of these other ones, look how dark that sky is, because it actually helps make it pop. Like, so you've got a little bit of this purple in here. It's just darkening that, because you know, I think a major feature of this painting is that strong contrast between the light and the dark. And also that maybe that this bird would, its sort of tail and feet get clipped by the waves themselves, so it almost sort of looks like it's strangely in behind the horizon, whereas yours seems to be sort of flying in front. So yours starts to look more like a very strangely patterned bird flying by a boat on the water, right? The water looks like it's really spraying up. So again, slightly different interpretation. And then, wow, here's Joshua's. That's pretty wild, Josh. That's, whoa, that's right. That is that. So that's it. So again, so this sky, we have a little bit more of a daytime sky than we've seen in the previous paintings. I don't mind this at all. This, instead of having a big bright blue sky here, we've got a gray sky. So it's almost an inversion of the previous paintings where we have this sky. This to me looks like, you know, an overcast day in Alberta or here in Vancouver, right? A rainy day with these big fluffy clouds in a gray sky, and yet here we have this big blue sky and a little bit of, you know, maybe morning sunrise, and we have these waves. So this one is a very different interpretation. I feel like this one, in an odd way, to me feels a lot more like something vaguely like Christian somehow. Like, I almost feel like this, I could see this as like the cover of a you know, the pamphlet they give you when you go to church, and you know, you sit down at your pew like at and eat a Christmas midnight mass or something. There's something. So it's interesting. You've sort of transformed this painting that's very strange and surreal into something much more serene. Okay, I think this is the last Magritte here. We have Deborah's version of it, and again, these much more turbulent waves. And the way that you've done the sky, we've got this sky looks like a very, you know, peaceful blue sky, but in behind, it's like there's a lot of turmoil. I see these kind of swirling brushstrokes up here. So we feel two different not only just times of day, but we also feel like a different weather system, like something that is like quite a menacing sky versus like a really beautiful sky. And I don't really know, and I don't think Magritte really knew what he was doing when he made this painting, but you know, images like this do make us think of, like, maybe, you know, the story in my mind might be that this could be like the vision of a sailor on a boat that is damaged and sinking in the middle of the ocean, and someone is just like, oh man, can you imagine if there was a beautiful bird just that I could jump on that would fly me away into like into a better world or something, right? Like, you know, anyway, let's, oh, I also had this little image that Sandra uploaded of just sort of the paintings before they even began, right? Okay, well, we're going to look at, I think, two more. We're going to look at Jacques-Louis David and Dr. Synthia St. James, and then we're going to take a look at the art that you guys have painted purely on your own. Here is Napoleon crossing the Alps here by Paula, and that one was in the Dropbox, so we didn't get a chance to paint this one. I really like that painting. It's a very famous it's maybe one of Jacques-Louis David's most famous paintings, but again, it's pretty complicated with that horse. So this is the one we did instead, which is the unfinished portrait of Napoleon. Oh. And here's Paula's version. I love that, Paula. And I love that you finished it. Like, you brought the clothing to completion. And same thing, Joshua did the same thing. Completed it with the clothes. That is really funny. But there's something funny about the size of Napoleon's head compared to the rest of his body, which is funny because Napoleon was famously a shorter man who had an outsized ego and certainly thought a lot about himself. And so this sort of ventures a little bit into caricature in this image, where we have someone whose head is larger than their body, and often these days we think of that as like a political cartoon, right? And Napoleon was a political figure, right? So that is the kind of interpretation that kind of most immediately comes to mind. Now, having said that, I also like the way that you painted it. That's cool. The one thing I would say is maybe these eyes are a little bit too white. I think one thing I kind of advocate is, even though, you know, like, let's say even my eyes, you know, there is white in my eyes right now, but not the entire eyeball is not bright white. In fact, like, my t-shirt is more white than my eyes. My eyes, if I was to try to paint it right now, would have probably kind of more of a cream color and maybe just a little bit of white kind of as a highlight, or even a little bit of highlight on the white of my eye itself, right? So I think a little bit of that, you know, might be kind of nice, like if we'd kind of just grade them down a little bit, because again, that's another really white eyes can make us think of like cartoons and comics, because often cartoon characters have like a big white eye with a little black dot in the center, right? So if that's what you want, that's totally fine. If not, maybe like here we have Maria's gone much more subtle with those eyes. Really great effect here. So Maria says, I'm proud of this one. I didn't think that I'd manage that. He looks younger, I think. I think it looks great, Maria. I think, and I'm glad that you feel happy with this one, and you're happy with the way it turned out, right? This, we've got some more portraits coming down the pipeline in the future, but we're also, especially for some of our beginner artists, we're going to be doing some fairly simple portraits as well, so that we can kind of slowly break people into more complex forms of painting. But again, just like the Magritte, the pipe, the Treachery of Images painting, because this painting was left unfinished by Jacques-Louis David because Napoleon could not sit still long enough for him to finish the painting, it allows us to really just focus on the face and not have to worry about all the other things that need to be painted. And Joshua did, I guess this is it looks like Joshua started painting this and then was like, you know what, I'm just going to keep on going and finish the rest of it. So that's cool. Why not, right? Yeah, these turned out great, Joshua. This is great. I think the one thing I would say, Joshua, is I think we've got nice contrast in the rest of the body, like around the arms and the shadows underneath here, underneath the collar, where the hand is touching the hip. But in the face, the contrast could probably be bumped up a little bit. Right? I don't think it's quite so apparent here because there's no contrast down here. It's just lines. But when we get up to the face in here, I think, you know, one of the my own just technique that I often use, that you might hear me doing, that we did when we did Kramer yesterday, is one thing I'll often do is just use like a dark color, if not my darkest color, to at least do the top eyelid and then the pupil itself. Right, and maybe a bit of the iris, and even sometimes, depending on the person, could be just also doing a little that darker for the eyebrows, maybe the nostrils, and then the line between the lips, if the lips are closed, right? Because that little bit of, and I think you could do even more contrast, another little bit of darker areas, let's say on the cheeks and the ears and where the hair comes down, that's not quite as dark as those areas I just mentioned, but I think that would be helpful. And you could even put a little bit of that darker stuff, just like a quick small lines between those fingers, and maybe on the belt buckle, maybe in here. And then Paula with this one. I think this is great. I am amazed at how great of a painting of a horse you did without using the template, Paula. That's pretty cool. And to do that face, there's a lot going on. This one would have been a big challenge, and you really just ran right at it. That's pretty cool. These gloves look great, those hands, and actually the way you painted the horse, the head of the horse and the proportions of the horse are pretty good. I'm not a horse expert, but I did a number of commissions for the Calgary Stampede, and I'll tell you, when you show your art to people that own horses, and if you've painted a horse or a cow or a bull, and you show it to people that are ranchers, that's the only thing they think. That's all they look at. They don't care what colors you're using. Like, if the proportions are off, they're not even going to give it a second look, right? So, but that's the difference between, you know, if you're making art for a specific audience like that, then that's really something that's very, very important to them. Okay, moving right along. Okay, so we're going to look at the Dr. Synthia St. James paintings that we did in celebration of Kwanzaa, and maybe let's look at them together first, and then we'll dive in. Okay, so how about we'll start with these ones, right? We did 2 paintings for Kwanzaa, and again, just like the Stuart Davis where we began earlier today with this episode, this particular style, I think, is, at least as far as I'm concerned, maybe one of the more, I don't know if it's more difficult, just more time-consuming, and patience is required to do a style like Dr. Synthia St. James, because she paints all these flat, solid colors that are like puzzle pieces that interlock with one another, and to do that well, as well as she did, just takes time and patience, because you really gotta, you don't want to overlap too much, and you don't want to leave gaps between things, and which is not the way that most like avant-garde painters like Matisse and Frida Kahlo and Emily Carr and all these other great artists painted. They were quite expressionist with the way they applied the paint. So that's one of the things that I think makes Dr. Synthia St. James a master, is obviously she's not painting in that style. She's got her own style of painting, but it requires a great deal of focus that I just don't have. Anyway, so we'll look. Here's Paula's version. I love these colors. Looks great. Let's look at Maria's. Wow, I love Maria that you added the bowl on top of her head as opposed to in her arms. That is a really fun little change. That is really cool, and it turned out great. This looks really beautiful. Like, you really took your time and you nailed it, and they look really, really nice. Like, I just look at that and go like, oh, ooh. That's like, I don't have, yeah, I was not so happy with my paintings that I made for this episode, just because I think it's something to do when I'm painting live. I get like, oh my goodness, I gotta move fast, and wow, here's May's version, right? You know, we see a lot more of the brush strokes, and that could be just the way the light is and the way it's photographed. But it's again, you know, I think Maria nailed it here, because not only are you painting inside, but you have to sort of think about the texture and the way that you apply that texture without building it up so fast. You can see, you know, just like I did, this is something that looks like May, you know, had a little bit more of a challenge for her. Same thing with Paula. Not an easy painting, so I'm not throwing daggers or anything here. Deborah, I think you did a better job. You know, it looks like we, you know, doing several layers of paint, and sometimes it's, you're like, oh, I nailed it the first time, but I got to do it. Oh, that's tough. So this is probably more likely an artist like her would have probably lots of different tubes of paint, so less mixing paint on a palette and then applying it, or if she does do that, she probably mixes large batches at once, so that whenever, if she knows that she's going to have to paint this again, just pulls that paint out of it, squeezes it out of a tube or out of a jar and paints it, so that we don't have these like slight variations of colors in those areas, that she's absolutely 100% sure to reproduce that same color in the same place again, right? We see that a few times in here. You know, again, I would just say that as a learning experience, it should just be like, wow, I have like a great deal more respect for this artist that I didn't really know before. I thought this would be a little bit easier. And sometimes people think like, oh, if you know, a real photorealist portrait of someone, that's going to be really tough. And then you make a painting of this, and you're like, oh, how is it possible that making a painting like this is more difficult than making a painting like this? It's all surprising, right? There's Paula's version. That turned out pretty cool. I like the color combinations in here worked really well. Let's go here. Wow, Maria again. Really, really cool. Yeah, that's attention to detail. I just don't have that patience. What I do love here, I think, May, this one I think is better, more well executed than the other one. Although it's tough to say. This is growing on me the more and more I look at it. But I think this one is even better. Somehow, even though it's still not quite as sharp as Dr. St. James's painting was. There's something about the way you painted this here that seems it kind of works more. I don't know why. Because there's still it's not as like almost like taped as the way that she originally did it. There's still kind of a looseness to it, but it somehow works really well. So that can just be trying it again and again. Wow, this is good. Lorenzo. And did the whole postage stamp, because that's how this image was used most famously. Both of these paintings were used as postage stamps by the U.S. Postal Service. So I think that's kind of cool that you brought it back into the postage stamp area here. And you did a pretty good job too of getting these pretty flat colors. And then Deborah, interesting. Deborah sort of did something a little bit different, which is to outline a little bit with some white. That certainly is an interesting little innovation that's going on there. Certainly creates some. Up here, that makes a lot of sense. Although it's strange that it would come down and then her head. See, the way that I would think, if you're going to outline, like, I don't mind this outline up here. When it comes down to her, though, and her hat being outlined, I don't know if same sort of thing down here. Like, I think if you're gonna outline that flag in this way, I think I'd want to see those lines continue down the rest of the flagpole, as well as up here. Does that make sense? Because, I mean, if we want to go for, because doing this starts to really make it look much more abstract. Like when I look at that, these start to look like puzzle pieces, and the body of this person behind the flag starts to become obscured, right? Like it's not necessarily as clear that's another person. I don't know. That's the reaction that when I look at that, it like, again, one of the ways that I try to approach art is I try to think of it as this is exactly the way the artist intended it to be, and whatever weirdness I see is done deliberately. So then I have to, as a viewer, look at it and think like, okay, well then what does that mean? If this is the way it's supposed to be, then how am I supposed to think about it? And that can take me as a viewer into some really interesting places. And sometimes I end up thinking like, wow, this person's a genius. And then you tell them and they're like, oh, I certainly did not. And you're like, okay, don't tell anybody that that's not, because I think the way that I'm interpreting it there should be the party line for this painting, because it makes it look like you're much more thoughtful than maybe you started. Anyway, so the way that I think about that is that it's sort of, it really flattens this whole painting even more, because the logic no longer follows the flagpole anymore, and that this little boy with the flag in front, and now it becomes more just shapes that are interlocking. Anyway, I could go on and read infinitely into things. So just starting the next, maybe I'll just show you here. If you're interested to see what would be coming up in the future episode, we're going to pick up where we left off here, which is the Caspar David Friedrich paintings, and then Gainsborough, the Blue Boy, and so on and so forth. That's what we'll do, probably somewhere around maybe Franz Marc. There's maybe where we'll end that. Anyway, just as a little heads up, if you haven't done the Caspar David Friedrich painting, or the Roy Lichtenstein, or the Da Vinci painting, you got about a month to take care of that. Also, actually, you know what? I want to just, and maybe a few people did do the Saint Zelensky painting and the sad Putin as Satan painting. If you're interested in doing that paint, since there's only Paula and looks like Tanya did a version, maybe I'll save those. I'll give people another little extra time to do those as well. So let's now take a look at all of the rest of the work that you guys have done over the past month since we last saw one another. So where should we begin here? Do I want to do, we'll work our way, we'll go reverse alphabetical here. And there's Sophia signing off. Good night, Sophia. We'll see you and get some good sleep. Okay. Deborah says the original had an outline. That's interesting. I don't remember that white outline on it. Okay, that's possible, I guess. So let's start here with Sharon's painting here of these poppies. And I think Sharon said we could use a couple of poppies at this sad time in our world. think you did a great job. I love this texture on the flowers here. I had to do a screenshot because I often see you upload these 3D photos and I can't download them in the conventional way, so that's why you see this little mouse on the bottom. Not sure, what could I offer? You know, maybe... I mean, I think these turned out really, really well. I almost feel like I want a little bit more contrast in some of these outer leaves, but I do like the texture and the sort of immediacy of your brush strokes here. And I love, what I really like is that you're using this texture especially in the foreground elements, and then maybe not as much or at all in the background, and that helps really create a dimension and a separation between foreground and background areas. So that might be something to really kind of think about pushing even further as you go forward. Very cool. Let's continue here. Let's go to Charmaine. Charmaine has done a few I thought there was another drawing. Oh, okay, so here's, yeah, there's one there. That is Are we family? We. That is funny. What a funny drawing. First of all, I love the way that they're drawn, and I also really like your choice to use this blue as a shadow. That is really wild. And often that's a great suggestion, is to, you know, if you're using a color, is to use the opposite color from the color wheel in its shadow, or something near, like, so for instance, you know, if you're using like this warm yellow is using like a warm blue or another blue in the shadow, or as reflected light. Like often when I'm teaching a drawing class right now, and when I recommend, if somebody's like drawing a banana, is to maybe put some purple or green into the darker areas, as opposed to just using a black to darken that yellow banana, because then it instantly creates so much more dimension and life. And often, just like we see here that Charmaine's done, is it like, think about how it would be a kind of a cool drawing if this was just a dark black gray shadow, but I think that blue takes it to a whole new level. I think that is really, really cool. And there's another one that you did as well here. I don't know how to say it. Nous ne savons pas comment le dire. Oh, sorry. That's cool. So just like I was just saying, I mean, I like this dark kind of crimson red under here. I think that works. But if you wanted to kind of amp this into a different area, in fact, let's just put this side by side. Right, if you know, in your yellow, let's say we put maybe a little bit of purple into the shadow in here, right, and maybe even, let's say, in a few places on there, maybe there's even a little bit of it there, and then in your blue, let's say in here in the matte we add a little bit of orange in there, or even just a little bit of green, just little bits of that in there, or take a little bit of this red and bring it back on top in just a few selected darker areas in there. I think you'd be surprised at kind of the kind of change that you'll notice happening. And that's something that a lot of colored pencil artists do all the time, but it might be something to really seriously consider in a drawing like that. So let's take, I love this drawing that Charmaine did as well. Took a photograph of the cashier and then did this drawing of them. And then I suggested, if you go back to the grocery store, and because I think you were suggesting potentially showing it to them or giving it to them, is ask them if you can take a photograph of them holding your drawing or the painting that I think you were thinking of making a painting of it afterwards. Because I love this. I think this looks really, really cool. I think she looks super colorful, and I would bet she would probably be pretty, like, honored that you took a picture like this or made an artwork out of her like that. Whether or not she allows you to share that image or not, just for your own, like, I think just for you to remember that moment would be kind of neat. Anyway, I really like the way that this turned out. I think she looks really pretty. I love the glasses. I also really like this little thing you're doing in here with these kind of like the edge of the glasses. Sometimes they create kind of a really weird effect over there. That's really nice. And even kind of this line that doesn't quite match up with the edge of her mask here. Those little tiny details, because that's the lens is going to kind of create a distortion. Sometimes that's why, you know, eyes can look bigger or smaller behind someone's glasses. Anyway, I like that. There's another thing I want to come back to. I think we're going to end with here, Charme. So just in case you're like, why didn't he show? Oh yeah, that's good. It's coming down. We'll see that. Here's some by Sandra. Sandra's got her Veggie Man and the Muffin Man. So I love the way that you caption these on the Facebook group. That's really funny. So I know that both of these took you quite a while, and clearly you spent a long time working on them, and you also sort of added your own little thing to them, because I don't remember there being this many flowers down here. I think these were all vegetables. So you've sort of made it your own, which I'm all for it. All for it. What could I add? I mean, I guess I do. Not that I want you to go back and do more work to it, but I guess I could see even more value contrasts, even darker on some of these vegetables and some of these flowers around some of the edges, or where they're overlapping, causing shadows. But again, already know it took you a long time to do that. Not that you need to. I think you probably learned more than you expected to just out of this painting. But let's say we go to this one here, your Muffin Man. I think this one turned out really great. I love the big, nice, solid colors you've used. Really, really nice. A couple little things, if I may, is you may want to think about adding a little shadow underneath the apples, because right now one might interpret this as these apples are floating or in the midst of falling. Maybe the skeleton is throwing them, and without a shadow underneath, because we have a little bit of shadow underneath this person, the matador, so that tells us that he's standing firmly on the ground. And because the apples, which exist in the same world, in the logic that exists within this painting, which is kind of surreal, because we've got this flying skeleton, so we know there's something kind of weird going on in here. But based upon the logic of this, with no shadows under the apples, it stands to reason that they're falling. In fact, because we don't even see, like, if for instance we were to draw let's see, just as a quick little demo here. Right, so if I was to, what could I draw, like a coffee mug or something, right? If I have a coffee mug and it is, I don't know if you can quite see, right? You see the shadows that are kind of coming off onto the side, right? So without this mug could just be floating in space right now, right? But if all of a sudden I just add, let's say, like a shadow here then that locates it in space. Same thing, let's say if we have a ball, right, but its shadow is down here, then that tells us that the ball is actually floating above the ground, right? So, you know, again, if I did this coffee mug, but its shadow was here, then you'd be like, whoa, what's happening? Is that cup falling from someone's hand? So when we see something like this and we don't even see the shadow underneath, then we start thinking, well, then they must be, if that can't be in behind him on the ground, it must be falling. Maybe there must be tiny little things that are falling right in front of our faces, right? So because of the shadow clearly doesn't even make it onto the painting in any way there at all. So that would be one little thing, is maybe just like you did, very slight little shadow underneath the figure, replicating that underneath the apples. And then the next little thing that I might say is we mentioned earlier with these eyes. If we have these eyes that are wide open, because we see white all the way around the eyes, and they're bright white, then it looks a little bit cartoony. Like, just try yourself to open your eyes all the way open, right? Like, if I try to do this, it's like I'm gonna get a headache trying to, if I want to try to see white all the way around my eyes. That is really hard to do. Like, you judge if you can see white all the way around. But so when we look at this painting, he's got like that, whoa, that kind of look, like something. Maybe he looks like he's seeing something off of stage, right? So first of all, that I think is a little bit odd. And so I think, you know, if we were to do, you know, when I taught the drawing class, which is on YouTube, you know, it usually your iris, right, which is the part of your eye that is green or hazel or whatever, part of that is clipped by an eyelid somewhere, right? Because if your eye is like this, it is wide open. In fact, most of the time, most of us have something like this, where the top and bottom of your iris is being clipped a little bit. So there's that. And then, like I said earlier, maybe not being bright white, but a little bit more gray, or at least, especially on the top. Like, if you're going to do something like this, we might have a bit of a shadow on the eyeball itself, and maybe a bit on the corners, right? And then you could potentially keep that bright white on either side. But if it's just white all the way around, then it does kind of venture more into a cartoony effect. Okay. And then Sandra also was working on this here. The Thomas Kincaid painting that we did, again, almost 2 years ago, and was working on this as a gift for her godmother and grandmother. That is cool. And so I think it's not, obviously it's not quite finished, so you're still working on it. But I like, you know, you've got the beginnings of it, and this was a fun painting to do. Thomas Kincaid gets a lot of ridicule. He certainly did not, you know, in some ways for good reason, especially some of the business practices. But it's hard to deny the fact that he was a pretty exceptional artist. Okay, see. All right, let's look at this Dr. Synthia St. James, because so this is what we're talking about, and Deborah says she outlined it. I'm not really sure I see what you're talking about. I don't. Where's the white outline? So okay, so you see this here. Okay, I get what you're saying. That I don't think is actually a white outline. I think that's just the way that the computer has in the JPEG compression. So I can see what you're saying there, but I don't. I'd be willing to put down a small amount of money to bet that there's no white outline there. I'm pretty sure, and I certainly don't see a white outline around here. And I'm willing to bet you money that that's the compression of the JPEG, and JPEG is a compression format. It's the most popular image format out there. But anyway, just thought I would go back there since I see you posting about it in the chat. Let's look here. Here's Richard's painting. I think he said originally started as a black and white study of a black and white photo by Leonard Cohen, but it morphed into a painting of a fictional jazz guitarist named Ray Super Fingers Taylor. That's great. That is really funny. I love that you started this painting and you wanted to sort of capture a musician or an artist that I'm assuming you admire Leonard Cohen, or why make a painting of him, as I do as well. I saw him in concert a couple of times. I'm a huge Leonard Cohen fan. Great Canadian, one of the greatest Canadian poets and musicians of all time. Anyway, I love that you started this painting, and then for whatever reason, maybe because you weren't happy or you didn't feel that you got a likeness, that you decided to, rather than abandon it, transform it into something else and something different. And I think you really created something really unique here. I also like the way that you painted it. So for instance, I just was talking moments ago about maybe adding a little bit more contrast around the eyes or lips or hands. I think we were talking about Napoleon. And yet, I would say this is an instance where I think I like it like this, right? Where it's a little bit more muted. It reminds me of like another artist, of Alex Katz. We did an Alex Katz painting, a K-A-T-Z painting a couple of years ago, because I'm a huge Alex Katz fan. I keep calling him Cat. Fan, and he does something similar to this as well, where we have sometimes like the facial features are left deliberately slightly muted, and I think there's some really interesting potential in here for you, where again, someone might feel inclined, like you've outlined a little bit of like the cuff on the shirt, is to outline all the rest of the body. And so what's actually interesting is a lot of the rest of the figure, the guitar, has been outlined, but the actual flesh of the body is not outlined. And that is the kind of thing that I don't necessarily mind at all, because that helps create a distinction in between different textures or materials, in this case between clothing and skin. And as long as there's an internal logic within a painting that makes sense and it stays consistent, then I think that works totally fine. I think whereas let's say you outlined the eyes and the nose, but not the hand and the fingers or the lips, then those are the kind of things I think like, oh, there's something kind of, there's an internal logic that is, there's multiple logics that are maybe conflicting, right? Whereas if there's a logic, no matter what it is or whether we agree with it, but if it is coherent within a painting, then us as viewers are very willing to go quite far with that, right? Holly says, I would like to read a novel with him in it. And I googled this fictional character and I couldn't find him. Yeah, because I think that's what was it? Ray Superfingers Taylor? Is that Ray? Oops. What did I just do there? So yeah, it definitely appears like you've created something a little bit different there. Very cool, Richard. I like that. That's really neat. That's very interesting. And then, you know, even in the chairs in the background are not outlined either, but they're also further back into space. So yeah, cool. Let's move on here to Ravi. So Ravi posted has been making some paintings that are intended to exist outdoors. And I think this is a really I found this really quite inspiring, actually, that you decided to make these little paintings on wood and hang them around your yard. We have like little street signs. I love that, you know, you've got a little landscape painting on the fence. You know, assuming you could look over this fence and see a quote-unquote real landscape, but you've got one here in case, let's say, you know, it's really foggy out, or, you know, I don't know, let's say your neighbor puts up I don't know, it's something really ugly in the backyard, like a bouncy castle, and your view's distorted. At least you could stand here and look at this landscape. I think that's real. There's something kind of funny and also pretty poignant too, and this is brilliant. I love this Tim Hortons drive-through by your door, or by the window by your door. That's like, all of that is very funny to me. Mars 41.x. That one's I'm not sure exactly what that one's about. Mars. Are these flowers on Mars? Are they planets? Not sure, Andrew. This one is more obscure. I feel like this almost feels like an inside joke that I don't quite understand. But again, there's something really interesting here of making paintings that exist outside. The one thing I would say is you just want to be careful. Like acrylic paint, if it comes into contact with water, can, especially, you know, as a painting dries, it will become less susceptible to because once the paint cures, it turns into a kind of a plastic. But if enough water saturates it, it can either start to run, or peel, or bubble, or flake right off entirely. So there are materials, in fact, let me see if I have... So this would be something that you may want to consider buying, is this like Rust-Oleum clear paint that you can, you spray this on all sorts of different things and then put it outside, and then it's sort of like the kind of stuff that you might put on the final coating on a car, right? That keeps that protects the paint, etc., right? So if you're planning on making a painting that you want to keep outside, I would probably spray it with multiple coats of something like this. This is just from Home Depot or a hardware store, so you should be able to find that. The one thing is, this is probably not archival, so if you do make a painting that goes outside and you spray it a bunch of times with this, that painting may last outside for a couple of years, but after a while this kind of thing could yellow or turn kind of brown, or who knows, it could go purple or green. Who knows what's actually inside material like that. But, you know, I do think it might be a fun thing to do. The other thing too is, you know, if I did this kind of thing and then, you know, spray painted it with this, it would be great. But if water got in underneath here, you know, sometimes these are often just cardboard inside these canvas panels. So, and even if it was wood or plywood, you know, plywood, it also doesn't deal very well with the weather. Deborah says, we painted stones with the grandkids and covered them with Mod Podge, and now they're fine. And the kids, so that's, I never thought about that, but Mod Podge obviously works. That's pretty smart. That's a great idea, Deborah. Okay, let's move on here. Here's Peter. Peter was at one point painting with us all the time, has gotten kind of busy and has been moving across the country. I think back to Vancouver from Montreal, but he included this table that he prepared. It looks like maybe, well, I don't know if he painted it white or if it was white. This is like just an IKEA table, but then transformed it into a Simpsons table, which is awesome. I love that. Right? Imagine, you know, there's a lot of people in our community that have children, that have grandchildren, nieces and nephews. Imagine doing something like this to give to one of the children in your life. Like, it would blow their mind. And you could take one of our templates from any of our classes, print them out, and paint one. You could paint a Van Gogh painting or a Dr. Synthia St. James painting onto a table, or like a clock. You know, you can get, you know, cheap clocks from IKEA. You can take the top off, and, you know, the back that has the numbers on it, right? You can also pop the hands off, and you can take that circular piece of cardboard that's just got some numbers printed on it, and you could paint over top of that, right? Or replace it with your own piece of wood that you painted over, reassemble it, put a battery in, get the time going, put it in a box, and imagine what that would do for, and that doesn't have to be the child in your life. It could be your partner or your friend or coworker or your boss, whatever. A customized artwork like that, it doesn't always have to be like a painting like this, right? You can transform it into something else entirely, right? And really use all of these creative skills that you've been developing. Awesome job. Great. Really looked amazing, Peter. I'm so proud of you. Okay, we got some from Paula here. I like these. I'm sorry, I can't remember the story behind this dog and this little girl, but they're really cool. These on, that's paper, right? I think you said something like in my sketchbook, but that doesn't really look like a sketchbook. Either way, those are, I like these a lot. You know, obviously you painted the background here. It makes me wonder, like, could we not paint the background behind this dog, customize that as well? I always think backgrounds can be opportunities that often as artists we sometimes miss. So I think it'd be nice to see a little bit more of that. Oh, and Paula just got here just in time for us to talk about your work too. And so here's another one that you did, Paula. That's cool. This little house on the hill. It does look, I was going to say, so I think it's the way that this is lit when you photographed it, but it does the way that this light is sort of hitting this house, it does sort of look like there's, you know, maybe clouds in the sky, and we have this light that's breaking through the clouds and illuminating the house, which is really nice. Might be something to even consider actually doing with an artwork like this, or a future artwork, because we do have this little bit more green that's coming through here that does tell us that this area is getting more light. But, you know, you can see that there's a few areas where actual sunlight are hitting it. That makes me almost want to see like a beam of light coming down that could be sort of, you know, refracted by some like rain or mist in the air kind of thing. And here's this one. Paul said, "Good snacks for hiking." And we've got the Warhol banana and soup can in front of this mountainous landscape, which is a great idea if you're going to go climb a mountain like that, to bring some snacks with you. I think that's pretty funny, Paula. That's great. I don't know. I mean, again, so this is an example, Paula, where, you know, you've really transformed these kind of simple Warholian kind of images. It makes me think of, like, and you've done this a number of times, so this is not anything new, but like, what could this dog be in front of? It's a beautiful picture of a dog, but what could the dog be, I don't know, in front of some soup cans? If you want to flip it with this here. Here's another mountainous landscape. These are great. I like how this mountain kind of just disappears, as mountains sometimes do, because they sort of go in and out of the atmosphere. And so the mountain sort of is kind of, it just fades as it approaches the ground. That is really nice. I almost feel like I want to see even more articulation in, like, the things that are closest to us, because that's what we would expect, is more detail here than we see elsewhere. And we don't see a lot, we don't see any detail really in here. We're not even really exactly sure what this is. I'm assuming that that's like a tree line. We see some sharp lines in the mountain, but not too much. So I kind of feel like I want to see a little bit more delineation, a little bit more marks of higher contrast, some darker marks, or at least stronger value contrasts in the foreground. Maybe. Don't have to, but you could. Okay, let's look. Pascal has uploaded a few things, and I did not get a chance to credit the original artist who did these. So, Pascal, I see you there in the chat. You can let us know who the original artist, because this is the original artist, and this is your interpretation. That is wild. You know, there's a album cover by Radiohead that looks, the indie rock band Radiohead, that has something similar to that, if I'm not totally mistaken. It's a really interesting way that you've interpreted this. Much more expressive than this. Like, this feels actually quite rigidly painted, the way that this is done. You know, it looks like there's a little bit of expressiveness in the paint, but then the lines that are over top kind of lock it back into its here, where I think these lines are much stronger, but you're also, the paint that you've applied beneath it is also a little bit more wild. Morel del Bogosian is the original for the roofscapes. Interesting. Not familiar with this artist at all. Very cool. I really like the sky in their artwork. That is really cool. And yours also very, very brushy. Very nice. There's another one here that you did. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of this artist either. So that's the original. And then I think this is you priming this canvas to paint on. Getting it started, and then this is your version of it, right? So I think this is the original, and then your version. Really kind of nice attempt. If anything, you've added, it appears to me, maybe it's the photograph, but you've added a little bit of color into the black and white, whereas this one looks purely monochrome. And then here you've got some kind of browns in there. Again, that could just be the lighting. Christopher Mudgett. I'm not familiar with this fellow's style either. Sort of neo-cute or neo Picasso, kind of late Picasso, these fingers. I do think that there's, you know, in here, you know, that hand is pretty well articulated. And here, even though it's obscured, we can, there's a logic to this. I think in here we are losing a little bit of the clarity. So it does look like you were painted this pretty fast. It makes me think of just maybe if you wanted to, not that you have to, but you could kind of go in and just kind of add a little bit of clarification, and that could be just going and adding more outline or cleaning up the outlines. Again, you don't have to, but I just thinking if this is your goal, is to do as close a reproduction. But this is really nice, the way that this is painted. I really like how these brushstrokes are done in here, where we really see the directionality of all of the mark making. It almost looks like it's done with charcoal. Huh. Very, very cool. Let's keep on going here. Here's another artist, and I apologize, I don't know who did this. Campagno? Don't know who that is. And so here's your version. Wow, okay, that is wild. So that's the original, and it looks like a watercolor, which you've then gone wild with. And these figures who are just giving a small kiss are now in a wild embrace here. Their legs and arms are all over one another, and this little was this a dog, or no, it's some sort of like a deer or something, is now gone much bigger and with these big beady eyes, cartoon eyes. And the little boat that was just kind of in the background is now speeding past. So it's interesting because it's almost like an animation where we have the before and then the after. That's funny. I like that. That is a really, I could see someone doing a really interesting whole series of artworks of like the before and after of famous paintings, right? Like I have these paintings just kicking around because I'm rotating. I've had this upstairs in our kitchen for the past couple of years, and since we did it, and my wife wanted the Kramer in its place. But you know, one could imagine doing like what happened 2 minutes before the girl with the pearl earring, or you know, 2 minutes afterwards, right? And which is, you know, maybe the role of a movie like The Girl with the Pearl Earrings starring Scarlett Johansson, kind of tells us a little bit of the backstory. But you know, the other thing, maybe you could do a painting like this, like where we zoom out, and maybe she's sitting on a, I don't know, a stool, or maybe, you know, maybe she's wearing like a tank top that has like Justin Bieber logo or something on it, right? And she's just dressed up to look like she's in this old paint, you know. So there's lots of really interesting ways that one can kind of approach any of these paintings to kind of give a little interesting spin on it. This one is by, or so the original is Matrios Sarian, or Martiros Sarian. Interesting. You got a whole bunch of new artists that I'm not familiar with. That's really cool. And then this, again, I'm not. This is this Hiroshige, or maybe Hokusai. I'm not sure. That does look like Mount Fuji. Maybe this is Hokusai, because he did that 100 views of Hokusai, or 100 views of Mount Fuji. Hokusai did. We did the Great Wave as one of the final paintings, I think, for that intro to painting series. And anyway, this is your version, Pascal. Wow. Let's see. it's interesting, you're much more heavy-handed with the color application in here versus this. We have a little bit lighter and these kind of fades, these gradient fades in here. And this is done as a print so you know, he was able to get these really beautiful fades. Yeah, so this is a hokusai, as Pascal says. So I could, you know, if you were, you could try to get a little bit more of a soft blend between these. But as this is, you've sort of transformed it into much more of a modern approach, which is exactly what Van Gogh did. Van Gogh was very much inspired by these Japanese artists, and we know that he collected prints by them, and he did a number of paintings based upon these Japanese masters. And you can see the paintings that he did, and it's really interesting how what Van Gogh took out of them, because he didn't take everything. He left some things, and he took some, and he did his own version of them, which is what we see Pascal doing here, and what we've been doing through all these Master Studies episodes, right? I want to move on. Wow, that is cool. So here's a Picasso looking in a mirror. That's interesting. Or is this a Picasso? That looks definitely like a Picasso. But maybe it's signed the same. Oh, here's Picasso. But then that's signature. So I don't know what we've gotten in this painting here. Maybe a couple of different artists colliding together. Oh, what's going on? Huh. Either way, this is really cool. Again, I'm always obviously like it when people kind of play with these paintings. I'm going to keep on moving along here. My hatching is not smooth. Do you guys have suggestions for it? So there's a number of things that I think we could work on in a painting like this. I did do a whole drawing course, 45 episodes on how to draw, and we did do, I think, 3 or 4 episodes on drawing faces. In fact, not just drawing faces, but drawing eyes and noses and ears and mouths, etc. So there's a lot of things I think that you could learn by watching some of those episodes that, you know, I could do a couple of little things right now. But in one of the very first episodes as part of that series, I also talk about how to do shading and a number of different techniques that I think would be helpful. I think I saw a few people, maybe it was even Holly, was sent a couple of links to some different ways to do some blending. Blending is only one of literally millions of different techniques that artists can use to do shading and rendering. Another one, like, I mean, I guess I can just say briefly, you know, like, you know, if we have a face and you have your eyes, which generally are in the middle of the face, and if I look at this image here, these eyes, you know, would probably want to be a little bit lower down here, right? Because if we draw a face, your eyes want to be roughly in the center. Your nose is halfway between here, and halfway between here is your mouth. So I think even just proportionally, the top of the head is a little bit short. Like, this would be your hairline for most people, but you know, for in this drawing, potentially we would have something like this. I mean, I'm just drawing the proportions. But then when it comes to like shading, yes, we can use the side of our pencil to shade, but it looks like you're also using, like, we could use hatch marks. So that's hatching. We could also do cross hatching. Right, so there's those, and that's so we have blending, right? So if I wanted to use a pencil, I could use blending to use the side of my pencil and build it up. Right, so that we kind of start dark and get, and then you can also use your finger just to kind of get rid of some of the lines if you don't like, right? And that helps to use, like, this is an HB pencil, but if you want, an HB works pretty well, but if you want something that smudges much easier, think about maybe going to like a 4B pencil, or go all the way to an 8B. And boy, oh boy, if you have like an 8B pencil, you're going to be able to get some really dark, and it smudges really easy. Right, so those are just a few things that come to mind when I think about your questions there, because I think there's a lot of little things that we could do to improve your drawing, and more than I can just kind of talk about right now. But so are these your images, Isaac? Or that because I know you said there's something on Instagram that I don't remember. Maybe let me just I'll take a second here to check out the Instagram, because I want to make sure I know you've been patiently watching. So I'm just going to load up my Instagram for a second and see if it was a message that you sent me. How long ago did you send me a message, Isaac? I don't see, unless you used a different name, I don't see an Isaac in my messages. Oh, here's... Oh, okay, so here, is this, maybe this is you here, a bunch. Okay, how can I share this with everyone? Let's see if I can do this. I think these might be yours, Isaac. Oops. Let me know if this is you. So, you're asking about some feedback on these. So we have this one, this one. Oh, I like that one a lot. That's cool. And that one, woo, these are cool. Especially like the last two a lot. So maybe I want to start here because I like this one a lot, and I think what's going on here is fantastic. Like I especially like the way that you drew the face. Like, so for instance, one might say that the face is not entirely proportionally correct, but it works, right? So just because something doesn't follow the academic rules of how something should be done doesn't mean that it's bad, right? Most of the past 100 years of art is all of artists playing, like, again, someone like Monet was ridiculed for paintings like this. He was kicked, or he wasn't even allowed to exhibit his art with the other good artists in the salon, and he formed a salon indépendant because they wouldn't let him be a part of the club, right? So what I see here is a really interesting stylistic innovation. I love this this drawing here. I would say it might be nice to have a little bit of darker areas in around the hands, and just to kind of separate them. like maybe either probably darkening just around underneath her arm, maybe a little bit of shadow from her chin on her hands. But I think there's a lot of great stuff happening in this drawing, so I really like that. So that's where I want to begin, because I want to make that really clear that I really like some of what's going on here. Same thing here. I like her eyes. I like her pose. All of that is working really well. I will say that these eyes seem to be slightly misaligned. Like this eye, I think, might want to go down a little bit further. So, for instance, you know, with this head here, think about, like, in the same way, if we were to draw this like this, that when we turn it, that they should still be aligned. Because right now, that one eye looks like it's a little bit higher, right? That other eye looks like it might be right here, when maybe it would benefit from being down there. The small little detail, but if you're asking me for some feedback, so, and the same sort of thing, like I would try to punch up the contrast a little bit more, right? Like, so, since you took the drawing class, you remember we did that value scale, right, where we divided this, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and I can't remember which one was the dark side and which one was the light, but let's say this was our darkest value, right? And then this was, we just left clear because it's white, and then these are, then we went from, let's say, you know, so that we have dark, and then there's different ways that we can get from dark to white, right? Just like I was talking about here, right? We have different ways that we can do some blending and rendering. Here, when I see your drawing, what I see is we've got the values are all kind of like this. We've got a white, and then we've got some darker values, but our darkest value is like 4 or 5. We don't have any of these much more extreme values. So, you know, yes, these are kind of dark, but they're not black. They're like a kind of mid-range gray. And that's why I think maybe if you were to get, like, because you might be using like an HB pencil, if you were even just get like a 2B pencil or 4B pencil, you could amp up and get much closer to a stronger contrast. And when you get those stronger contrasts, you're going to see more volume appear. You're going to see it gives the illusion of depth much stronger. So that's what I would say here. Again, I don't mind so much that these eyes aren't totally perfectly aligned. Like, first of all, I would say almost nobody alive today has perfectly symmetrical facial features, right? Most people have one eye that's a little bit higher than the other. So it's entirely possible that this person eyes are not perfectly aligned anyway to begin with. But this seems maybe a little bit more exaggerated than we might expect. Let's see, if we look at this one, I think you've done a great job with her face. I think those eyes are looking really good. So her body is definitely a little bit smaller in proportion to her face, right? And when we did the drawing class, remember we talked about drawing a person with, you know, maybe 6 or 8 heads tall. If we look at this, her head is, if we take another head, it comes almost down to her waist, and then we could probably get 2 more heads to go further down. So that tells us this figure is maybe about a 4 head tall figure, and a 4 in if we were to kind of go to real life, someone that is 4 heads tall is probably about 6 years old, around that age, right? Our daughter, who is 2.5, almost approaching 3, is about 3 heads tall, maybe, right? So, meaning her head is literally, if we have her head, the rest of her body is about 2-3 heads in proportion, right? Versus an adult like me, you could see how, right, if I took this head here and take another one and then take another one, right, that's my belly button right there, and that's 2 heads, right? So you can imagine here, her belly button's right there, but we're really, that's like 1 head down there, right? So that just, if that gives you an idea of maybe her body needs, her arms and her torso need to be a little bit longer, which might mean, if you're to do this drawing, that her belly button might actually be much right down here as opposed to here, which would stretch her body out. Which, again, I'm not saying that you need to do that, because there's plenty of artists that do interesting things with the human body and play with proportion, right? So you could keep it like this if you're, because I'm not necessarily saying that there's anything wrong with this drawing, but if your goal is to have quote-unquote more normal proportions, right? And what does that mean? Most people, what is a normal person to begin with? That's a whole other conversation. But I think my assumption, usually when people want advice, is because they're feeling that it's not normal. There's something abnormal about this. So I think also we could spend a little bit more time drawing hands and learning to draw hands. I think you did a really great job here. This hand seems to be, you know, you could use a little bit of work, and it looks like you were frustrated in that area anyway. And then lastly, this actually I think works pretty well as well. I'm trying to, I don't mind her face up here. I think her jaw is a little bit little too strong. So, you know, currently you have lips like this, right? I think we'd want to have her chin a little bit more to curve in a little bit. So just kind of, so it's not quite as angular as that. And then also in her chest here, I think there's a little bit of confusion as to, so what I would try to do is maybe with one of her breasts here have, you know, you'd have some type of like shadowy area here to let us know that this part of her body is close, or oops, that's not even on camera. Let's go to here, sorry. So you'd want to have some kind of a shadow showing us that this part of her chest is in front of this part of her chest. All right, and I think we just want to darken something in and around here. Maybe even her clothing might kind of, the shape of her clothes might change to reflect her body a little bit. You guys in the chat crack me up. Oh my goodness. Donna says, Michael's scribbles are better than my best portrait. That's funny. And Donna says, are you going to do your update your drawing class? You said something the other night, but I might have misheard. I eventually do, but it probably won't be until at least January of next year, like maybe 8 or 9 months from now. But considering my drawing classes just exploded on Facebook, and at least 2 or 3 comments every day I get on the drawing class, so it does make me think, seems like there's quite the something about it is working. And I sort of just you know, I certainly didn't put as much energy and time as I've been doing into our painting course. So anyway, So Isaac says, thank you so much. I appreciate it a ton. But they're great artwork, Isaac. I really encourage you to keep on going. I think you're also really on... I think what's even more important than getting those drawings correct is to really continue to explore your own style. Because there's something really cool going on with the way that you're drawing your faces and even the bodies. And if you want to keep those bodies a little bit smaller than the heads, there's nothing wrong with that at all. That could be a really interesting like path for you to follow, at least for a little bit, and to see where it takes you. Good work, good work. Okay, let's look here. Maria, speaking of drawing, I think Maria uploaded this a while ago and I just somehow did not get to it or forgot to do it. So I just wanted to kind of show this. I love this drawing. And Marie says, should I paint it? Well, I mean, goodness, maybe. It's also really cool as it is right now. I could see it looking really cool as a painting. Absolutely. You may even want to just do another version of it. You might want to keep it like this and then do a painting on a different canvas so you can have them side by side. I don't know. I could also see this as like can you imagine this as a t-shirt? I could see that as a really cool t-shirt or a poster or a book cover, an album cover. I think there's because of the way that the reason why I say like a t-shirt is it lends itself well to that because everything's sort of contained within this one bubble like form, right? It's not like the landscape continues to go out in every direction. There's more houses. It all sort of fits into one shape. So I feel like that's some really good potential there. This one too, Maria uploaded, and I think this is a self-portrait. I can't remember what you called it. And you said, it's so awful to look at yourself this much. You stare at your image and you get to deal with all the stuff buried underneath. The dripping was done on accident. I called it selfish. First of all, I agree. Doing a self-portrait is causes a lot of people anxiety because sometimes it's like, as you said, looking at yourself in the mirror. Often we look at ourselves in the mirror and brush our teeth, comb our hair, do a little makeup or whatever, and then we're gone, right? So it might take us sometimes between 1 minute or 30 minutes to do that before we leave the bathroom. Looking at yourself in the mirror when you're making a painting, you could be sitting there looking in the mirror for 4 or 5 hours, and that's certainly not something most people are accustomed to or want to do, especially when you start really looking at your facial features and like, oh, look at that wrinkle, I didn't notice that, oh, look at, oh, I got new bags under my eyes, oh, that double chin. So I totally get it. Like when I do classes in person and where I'm like, okay, next week we're going to do self-portraits, sometimes a few people don't show up to that class because they're just like, I don't want to be looking at myself for 2 hours in a mirror, right? So I completely understand. Having said that, it is one of the most useful exercises that exists for artists on Earth, because you've got a face, and that face, it's yours. So if you're willing to sit down and paint, your face is also, assuming, willing to also be painted, right? So it's not like you have to pay that person any money. It's just your own time and looking in the mirror. I will say, like, I think there's some really cool, like, if you were to tell me that this painting was done exactly the way you intended it to and you're super happy with it, I'd be like, that sounds great, that's fine, yeah, absolutely. Does it look like a classical painting from art history, like a Vermeer? No, it doesn't. It looks like we have much more of a kind of quote-unquote modern approach to painting the face, because we see big areas of color, so we can see the hand of the artist, in your case your hand painting this painting. So someone like Vermeer went to great lengths to hide the brush strokes, right? There are artists that paint like Vermeer today, but more artists are more interested in being more expressive than they ever were in history. I suspect probably one thing that, like, I'm not sure, so I don't want to put anything in, but I suspect you probably did not want these darker patches of color here, and that you were trying to paint and kind of being like, whoa, that's too dark. Oh, that's too light. That's too red. Oh, that's too brown. Right? Totally understand that. It could be frustrating. One thing that you may want to, one thing that can often be the major source of difficulty for artists is just the image that you're working from can cause you some difficulty. So in this case, you're working from maybe a photograph or looking in the mirror. The one thing you may want to think about is having maybe more, is really playing with the light and making sure that you might want to have one, like, so for instance, on camera right now, if I was to do my own self-portrait, I would not use this lighting. The light I have right now is pretty even. I've got lights coming from the sides and from the front, so my face, maybe, I don't know, on camera it might work. If I was going to do a painting of myself, however, I would probably change the light. So let's say, let's just do that. I'll just turn these off for a second. And maybe even turn this one off. Let's turn that on. Huh. Okay. That might be a little bit dim, but this would be approaching maybe the light that I'd want. Because if I've got more, if I have like a bright light and I got some darker areas, that's going to make it easier for me to make my self-portrait. Because then I'm going to have more clearly defined areas that I can work on. Painting a face where the whole face is really well illuminated can be really tricky, because you've got to be really careful about the different values, and matching those values can be a major headache. Whereas if you have stronger contrasts, that will make your life a little bit easier, because you're like, okay, well, I've got some, I know this is going to be light and this is going to be darker. So those are, that, especially if you're kind of beginning and you're struggling, going for more quote-unquote theatrical lighting would be, I think, your goal. That would be probably, so just even the beginning to finding a better image to work from would be my suggestion. Here, let me just turn some lights back on. Okay, so that's what I would say. I gotta say though, again, I don't mind this painting. I think the proportions of the face are bang on. Like, to me, when I look at this, it sort of looks like maybe when people put like a mask on their face, like like women might put like mud on their face before going to bed and some cucumbers on their eyes, kind of thing. That's a little bit about what it kind of appears to me, a little bit like that. because these grays are so strong. But the underlying structure of this painting, I think, is working really, really well. So I don't think it needs. I think it could just be balancing a little bit. Like, so for instance, you could take the same painting, based upon what we were just talking about with lighting, change the lighting to make it a little bit more contrasting. So maybe, let's say we got some light here on this side of your face, just allow it to get a little bit darker, and then just sort of lightening up some of these areas. And I think with this painting, you're within reach of finishing it and it being really, really satisfying. Anyway, I got to move on because we got more stuff to look at. But here's another one you started. And is it too weird? I don't know. Is it finished? It would be my question. And if I assume it's finished, I don't think it's too weird. I've seen many paintings like this before. I think seeing the face is definitely harder to see. It's something maybe not. Maybe is this? It looks like your self-portrait in there because I see your hair in there. I think it might be kind of nice to see the face painted a little bit more. Is it too weird? I don't think it's too weird. But I'm also, you'd have to really try pretty hard to find something that I think is too weird. That would be my only thing. So let's move on here to another painting by Lolly. So look at this again. Lolly has not felt confident enough to upload any of their works, and here we've got a really cool painting. I think it looks great. This is probably one of the best of this paintings that we saw of this entire series of Picassos we did, and you did it. So I don't know, Lolly. Unless these two paintings are just a total anomaly and everything else you did is just brutally awful, which is virtually impossible and extremely unlikely, then I think we need to be seeing a lot more of your art. So anyway, I mean, like, even just for instance, what you've done in the background with this, like in the original, this was very weirdly undefined. It wasn't quite clear what was going on in Picasso's painting. And so when I painted it, I also sort of kept it kind of a little bit obscure. You, on the other hand, have actually you've articulated it quite a lot and added your own spin to it, and it looks like, I'm trying to think of what culture builds things like that. I don't know, it kind of looks like something out of Star Wars, quite frankly. You know, the beginning of A New Hope, where they're on, was it Tatooine, and everything's kind of dome-shaped. I don't know, it kind of looks like a Star Wars. With the young Luke Skywalker, the episode, was it episode 4? And yeah, New Hope. Anyway, I also love the way that you painted the figures. These are great. These are really, really good. This is a great painting. I'd venture to say also, like, you know, the way that you've done the faces, they're a little bit different than Picasso. I especially like this one. Let's take a look at them. Like, considering, I'm assuming these are 9x12 canvas panels. The amount of detail you're able to get out of it is pretty amazing. That one, I think the nose, I mean, again, I'm not saying you need to do any work. It makes me think maybe there could be just a little, yeah, I don't know, maybe, I would say maybe this chin could come out just a little bit, because we see more of the eyes than we would expect to see the chin. But just, again, just nitpicky. But I also really like the way that you've painted these clothes, and so much so that you've transformed it from just this little circus costume into, like, I'm like, if I could buy this set of clothes, I would wear that. That's my style right there. So anyway, looks great. Great job, Lolly. I'm so excited to see some of your art now appearing here. So keep on going. Keep painting them and keep submitting them to us. Okay, so I wanted to look here at Karen. Karen has made this painting, and I think Karen's a newer member of our community as well. So here's a painting that they did, and then took this painting, brought it into, scanned it into the, I think it was done on the, or maybe they started like this, and then made a painting of it. I can't remember the sequence of events here. I know there was one, the chicken and the egg, which one came first, but we have this, this, and it ends up as a phone case. And whatever direction it took to get to this point is awesome. I never thought about making custom phone cases. I knew that obviously somebody's making them, but the fact that you could just upload your own design to a website and get it made, and a few weeks later it arrives in the mail, is awesome, and should be an inspiration for anybody watching right now, that you could take any painting you've made, whether it is a version of a Picasso you did like Lolly just showed us, or something else that you've created. Wouldn't it be cool to be walking around with something like this? And then imagine showing up at, you know, your office meeting, and you take your phone out and put it on the table, and somebody's like, wow, that's a really cool phone case. Where did you get that? Oh, well, you can't really buy it anywhere because I designed it. It's based on a painting I did. You're like, wait a second, you did that? I will pay you. If you can get me one like that, I'll buy it off of you. Right? And boom, a little light bulb goes on. Maybe I could be opening a little Etsy shop and just selling these things. And maybe only sell 5 of them. Right? But then another light bulb comes off. Well, maybe I'll do something else. And before you know it, you're a full-time artist like me. And the addiction is strong. Once you get a few of those sales, then you're screwed, and then you gotta then you're you find yourself making YouTube videos. And anyway, here's a glove by Josh. I'm gonna move on here, and anyway, I did want to say just really quickly, sorry, that I love these paintings, Karen. I also think the painting itself is really cool, and these images you created are also super, super cool, let alone the fact that you made these phone cases. I think they turned out great. I love your color choices. Really, really nice. Really great job. Highly encouraged. Just because we got more artworks to look at here, and I still got about halfway to go, I want to kind of pick up the pace a bit. I love your glove here that you painted, Joshua. That's great. And it looks like a rubber glove. The texture that you applied here gives it that kind of very rubbery kind of quality, right? The roundness of these fingers and the colors lend itself very well to that. Here's a version of a John Singer Sargent portrait that you did. I like the... this has turned out really nice. This is one of your nicer portraits that I've seen you paint. And then what I love here is that Paula did her own version of Joshua's version of a John Singer Sargent painting. So Paula, who just cannot get enough painting accomplished every day, decided to then do a painting based on someone else's painting that they uploaded to the Facebook group, which is awesome. That is super cool. What an awesome community of artists we have here. So where do I mean, this looks great, Joshua. I don't remember the original Singer Sargent painting, but it looks pretty good, or at least your version looks good. It could be better than the original, I don't know. And then Paula's here. You know, obviously, just based on the original, you might want to think the nose could be a little bit bigger, because I think you got the chin. The chin is kind of pronounced, but the nose is maybe half the size of the original. Do you need to make the nose bigger, or could we be happy with a nose like this? I think we could be very happy with a nose like that. So I'm going to just continue on, but bravo, Paula, for getting so inspired to do a painting based on somebody else's painting. And you've done a few more of those, but we're not going to look at them this time, because we'll look at them in a future episode because they're about more recent paintings. But I just want to, in case you're like, why isn't he going to show more of, because they relate to other paintings, right? So here's a few more Joshua paintings here. I think these look great. I think we maybe just want a little bit more shadow there. I think this foot is probably bigger in the original because it looks like it's foreshortened. I love this painting of Monet by Sargent. I wasn't aware that he did that. That looks really nice. Some of the fine detailing in here. I think maybe this hair might come up a little, like his neck appears to kind of come outside the collar and meet the hair. So I think this neck, if the fastest thing would be just to maybe paint a little bit of this same color over top of the neck a little bit, so to trim it down so it fits into the collar and the hair comes over there, but otherwise looks great. Maybe a little more paint on some of this red coming through, but not a big deal. Here's a version that I think you painted here based on a Picasso. That's fantastic, and I love this big gilded frame around it too. Is fantastic. It certainly makes it look like an expensive artwork all of a sudden. I don't have anything to offer on that. Looks great. Here's did we do both of these or just this one? We did a Banksy a couple of years ago. It showed how to make a stencil and spray paint with one or do it on a canvas. So that looks cool. Not familiar. That looks kind of like a Fernand Léger maybe painting. I think you call this My Contemporary Art Wall. That's great. And then you did a Manet. That's a nice. That turned out really nice. I think, is this one of the ones that was stolen from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum as part of that heist a few years ago? That might be it. That might be that famous, because there was the biggest art theft in history occurred in Boston about 20 years ago now. There's been a number of great documentaries about it, more recently on Netflix, but some very expensive, great masterpieces, and sadly they think it was all stolen by just gangsters who wanted to have that artwork that they could trade to get out of jail if they ever got arrested. So they're just holding on to them, waiting for some, they're using it as like a get out of jail free card. So anyway, Deborah says we did the Banksy with the balloons. That's right. I rely on you guys as my memory nowadays. Here's another Joshua in style of Max Ernst. That's cool. Okay, let's move on to Holly. Holly included that is wild, and I don't remember the story behind this one, Holly. My apologies, but that is cool. Maybe this was inspired by the time we were doing the Roy Lichtenstein paintings. It definitely has a pop art vibe. You got like the Van Gogh with the Ben-Day dots in behind. That's pretty cool. It's neat the way that it sort of looks like it could be cutout paper glued onto here. Really wild color. It is interesting that inside here we don't have any outlines. So it definitely seems different than the rest of it. It looks kind of like a sticker, whereas everything else looks like a cartoon comic. It's pretty wild. I like that a lot. I think another thing that I appreciate that Holly included is uploaded this book of facial expressions that she found. And this type of thing, if you're really struggling to draw faces, is to draw faces that have expressions. Like once you've got the basic structure of the face down, is to spend some time drawing expression, because that is something that a lot of people struggle with. And this looks like a really cool book. I've never seen it before, but this looks like it could be a good investment. So, because any one of these could be could occupy you as an artist and be really valuable learning experiences. Here's a cherry that Holly painted, and here, remember when I was talking about using shadow, like different colors, your opposing colors in the shadow, right? So we've got these reds, and what do we see in the shadow is some greens, right? So that's really nice to see that in here, including a little bit of brown. So it just gives it that extra little bit of volume. and just life, because shadows aren't just black. Like, often, you know, when we're just getting to understand a little bit about art, we often just shadows, everything is just black. But if we include some color in the shadows, which is why I prefer, whenever possible, to mix my own grays and blacks, because there's almost by default, by accident, there's going to be some color. It's because it's very hard to get that perfectly gray, because you got to get the yellow and the warm yellow, or warm red, cool blue, and cool yellow. You got to get that mixture exactly right for it to be perfectly gray. And if it's a little bit off, it's going to be a little bit blue, or a little yellow, or brown, or green, etc. And that can be frustrating, but you can see that it can actually be really useful, if anything. That's cool. Nice. Another one, Holly. That's cool. I like this. That kind of water jug with the flower popping out of it. Really nice texture on here. That's great. Yeah, what could I offer to say in here? I don't know. Looks good. I'm a little bit less clear as I mean, I'm assuming that's a flower, and maybe the back side of the flower, like that's the stem. But I don't mind it. I don't mind the fact that I don't know exactly what it is, but it is something to think about if it needs any clarity there. Like potentially a little bit darker here, just to define that, and even behind this handle here, just that little bit on the opposite side, just tiny little details. Anyway, let's move on. Here's a photograph of a fish that Holly found, and then the painting that they made from it. I love this. Awesome. Chef's kiss. Great stuff. Great job, Holly. This is not an easy painting to have made, right? Like, all of these reflections, to do that is tricky, and it requires, you know, some high contrast and values between the darks and the lights. And the fact that you're able to do this at all is very impressive. Could it be even better? Sure. But I would say probably most people watching right now would be overjoyed if they were capable of doing anything in this vicinity. And so I think, you know, I can see the different strategies you've used here with this. Looks like a brown under painting, or like an imprimatura under here, to give this whole thing that kind of warmth and life underneath that reflection. So I think it turned out really great. Highly impressed. Really well done. And then this is a painting I know that you worked on for quite a while. This painting by Edward Hopper, the chop suey. We didn't do this in class, so this is something that you just felt motivated to do on your own. And this is really, it turned out really great. I think you said you spent a long time on her eyes and were quite frustrated. Same thing with his head. I remember last time we talked, we showed some images where you were using your hand sanitizer to kind of clean away parts of the painting you weren't happy with. But boy, oh boy, it looks like it was certainly worth the time, because this has got to be pretty satisfying. It looks like it's a little bit larger canvas, so I'm hoping that this is hanging somewhere in your house. Really nice. And all the subtlety in here really paid off. Even the window, beautiful. You know, sometimes, like, when I see the best artworks, when you guys put it's like I don't know what to say. Let's just move on, because it's like, good. That's great. Really well done. Really proud of you. Great job. I'm going to keep on powering ahead here. This is another great painting. Heidi did this based on the barge that had beached here in Vancouver. It was a big news story. It goes to show that here in Canada, the news can be pretty mundane, which frankly can be a really good thing, right? But there was this like barge that just ran aground, or maybe it was I don't remember the whole story. Anyway, it was stuck on the shore near this public beach, one of the busiest beaches in Vancouver. So it was hard to ignore for a few months where it was stranded there. But first of all, I love that you included this thing that was part of our landscape in this part of the world for a while, and you made a painting of it. In a few years, people are gonna be like, what on earth is that? And then you'd be like, oh, and people are like, oh, I remember that. That is so cool. It's so neat you made a painting of it, right? And really, that's what a lot of art is connecting people back to those memories. So that in and of itself is interesting. The way you've painted it, the sky, the reflections, really bring it all home. That's fantastic. Really, really good. Again, I don't know what I could offer here. Maybe, again, it feels very nitpicky, but I do feel like I want this corner to be stronger. We've got this edge comes up and then just sort of rounds, and I feel like this line needs to be as dark as this line, because the corner I don't think is right here. I think it's right there. I could be wrong. Minor, again, super ridiculous detail to point out, but if I was, and I might even consider darkening this side, making that darker, because it appears that the sun is behind it, so this is getting the least amount of light. There's reflected light from the atmosphere and trees, but I think this should be darker. You got this dark area here. I think this area should be as dark, if not darker. Now you might say the photograph is not like that, or it's not the way, but it sort of doesn't matter, right? If it doesn't look, it doesn't matter what it looks like in real life. If what we are looking at is what's in front of us, we have to make that work. Here's Greg's. I love this. I'm a big fan of comic books, kung fu movies. So this is the photo, and that's what you created from it. That is awesome, Greg. Wow. What is going on in this group? You guys are cranking out all this amazing stuff. So I think this looks really cool. I think the face is awesome. I don't think I have anything to offer about the face. There's a little, I would expect it to be darker underneath the jaw, but that can be fraught. I'd be a little careful here. I do think this line pointing to the words that is maybe, again, this is very nitpicky, but that line is a little bit too diagonal. Let's see if I could, just a quick little thing here with, let's say, this ear. Right now, that line is kind of pointing here. His actual jaw is going to be something more like that. So you don't have to, I probably would not paint all that line, but I would consider getting rid of this line and putting so in other words, I think you want that as opposed to that. Tiny little detail. The other thing that I see here with this hand is, you've got these fingers and thumb here, right? I think we want to emphasize that. We have these, but these now start to look like just more parts, because you've got the joints of the fingers. But I think you want to emphasize that, and then I think we're also missing a line in here, right? We've got some of these lines for the thumb, but you're missing this line, and I think you want to just extend that line a little bit bigger. Not a big deal. If those are problems with your painting that probably the majority of people would not notice, you're doing fantastic. again, I think this, and the reason why probably you missed that is just because the source image is so dark that we can't see what's going on here. Neither can we really see what's going on here. Like, what I see here is the shadow that you've included, but you've also decided not to include a lot of the darker areas in the face here, right? So what you've done is really lightened up these areas, and that means you're having to kind of now use a knowledge of an anatomy to fill in the blanks where it's too dark, and that's tricky to do. But you know, I teach anatomy at our university, so those are just little things that I immediately notice that I think could be articulated a little bit differently. And again, sometimes that's the difficulty when we work with a photograph, especially if it's a little bit darker. We don't know what's in the shadow, and if we're not going to paint the shadow, then we've got to illuminate those areas. I mean, then we go to another painting that you did, and it's like, clearly you can paint very, very well. In fact, most people would probably give a kidney to be able to make a painting like this, Greg. So this is gorgeous. What's kind of interesting is, you know, when we're further away, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to determine that this is not in fact a photograph. And yet once we start looking closely at it, it's like, oh, I actually, you're making it look way more complicated than it actually is, right? I mean, we've just got this kind of cold blue sky and the wisps of some clouds, which are done pretty well, but they're not overly complex or articulated. And then we've got, you did a masterful job of the post here. And then really we've just got a bunch of straight lines in front that look like wires. But it's done very convincingly. Very, very, very good job. Again, nothing I can say about this one. No comments, but it looks awesome. Very, very cool. Let's look up here. We got Donna's artwork here. I love this sort of abstract drawing. And I can't remember, was it Donna, were you the one who was doing all the rocks? Like on the beach? Or was that Eleanor? But this could look like a sketch that we're like, I'm kind of like, or maybe this is just a doodle. Maybe you did a bunch of doodly lines and then started painting over top of it. But I don't know, I really like that. I also like this, how you left a little bit blank and then wrote text up here. I'm bold, I'm brave, I'm fierce. Cool. And this is acrylic, right? I like the way that rather than trying to blend this, you've just done these sort of like rings and maybe added a little bit more blue or white or another color to kind of get the rendering here, right? Again, just like we were talking about lots of different ways to render, you can also do something like this where rather than using cross-hatching or hatching or blending, we have these shapes, right? Really, really nice. I like this a lot. Here's another one. Donna says it's a doodle. It was you did do the gecko and the rocks. See, somewhere inside that brain is all this information. I love this. This is your dog's head and the paint that blopped onto the top of the dog's head. So lucky that your little dog Belle was there to catch the paint. That was very funny. I can be kind, brave, fierce, all at the same time. I love it. I love this drawing too. That is cool. I love the style, the way that you've drawn these. Wow. I want to see more of this. I could see these as paintings, as watercolors. I could also see these as like the beginning of a really cool kids book or note cards, like birthday cards, Christmas cards using this style. I mean, obviously you've done a lot of really cool things like that in the past, as we're going to see even more of here in a moment, but yeah, really cool. And Donna said, this is the picture I was making when I rushed to feed the dog and then fell down the stairs and broke my neck. Right, so you're talking about, I think this was a really hard painting to come back to and to finish, but it makes me so proud of you for coming back and being like, that painting that broke my back, I'm going to come back and I'm going to defeat it. I'm going to make it work. That is awesome. That is very inspiring. Because there's a lot of other people who would associate potentially painting with that accident and being like, I don't know if I can ever paint again because I have this like being. Last time I painted, I fell down the stairs and I hurt myself severely. So the fact that you did that takes a tremendous amount of courage. Very proud of you, Donna. Awesome. Makes me so proud of you. Okay, let's move on. You got Dolores up next, and I love this. This is really cool. This watercolor here, the pen and ink, and then I think that's maybe it's watercolor over ink, but that's really cool. I like this really kind of shaky way of drawing too, which is probably very different than a lot of other people. Like, I like that you allow the pen to kind of be, because when I look at this kind of thing, I think of it as someone observing closely, like, because to get a line like that, you got to be moving kind of slowly, right? Like, in order to make a drawing, let's say even just of these stems, if you're drawing quickly, your line is going to be pretty even. But if you're looking closely at those stems, right, it's going to be kind of a little bit uneven. And that, to me, like, there's way more personality in this line than there is here. Nothing wrong with that line, but that just feels like there's more character in there, and we all love a good character, right? And then here's a photograph, whoops, that you took, and it looks like it's maybe through a car window or something. It's not very clear, but this is the painting you created from it. Again, awesome. Really, really cool. Great job. Okay, I'm going to keep on going forward here because we've been 3.5 hours. I'm certain some people are like, when on earth is he going to get to my stuff? So, I love this. I feel like, did we look at this already, or have I just seen it? You work an earlier version of this or something. I love the texture of the paint. Really nice. I like how we can even still see through the vase, the flowers in the vase. Wow, that is cool. I like that a lot. Here's another one. I love this very expressive blue. Like, all of this feels like, I think, did you do one of we looked at last time, similar to this? This is even more expressive. Really cool. You know, there's like just a definite speed of painting that is quite attractive here. I like that. Okay. So here's Kathy's painting here. I'm not sure, is there a difference between these two? So this is the Matthew Wong painting that we did. When did we do this? Maybe last summer or so. I think it's really cool. What was the concern? I wish the right was darker. Is that why it looks closer to the left, or is this my eye? I don't know what the. I think it looks great. I mean, does this look closer to us? It should, because you could see the pathway like this. There's some grass in between. Here's the pathway. Assuming in the logic of this painting, we're standing on the pathway and we're looking at this. There's the pathway and then there's grass, and here this comes right down below, which means it potentially is within our reach, whereas this is much further away from us. So does it look closer to us? I wish the right was darker, and is that why it looks closer than the left? I think it's working. I'm not really quite sure what, maybe I'm totally misunderstanding, but anyway. So let's look at, wow, here's a bunch by Alex. Let's look at all of these, make them bigger. These are awesome. Okay, so hi everyone. The Lord has made a wonderful day. I wanted to share my art to you all. I hope you will like it. We do, absolutely, Alex. I love these. I love your drawings when you post them onto the Facebook. They're always so of these smiling portraits. Where should we start here? Cool. I also like your writing on here. One thing I would say is, again, something like I've said a number of times, it might be nice. Again, we can, if we assume that they're done exactly the way you want, then it's totally fine. Often I think maybe people are part of this group because they want some feedback in order to get better. So then I think, okay, if people want it to be better, then what can we improve on? I would say, like I'm a broken record, is maybe a bit more contrast would be nice. Like, so for instance, right now, all of your outlines, they're all the same darkness, right? We do have a few little bit lighter areas, right? We got this line and we got this line, but you know, like if we go back to my value scale, right? And this is, I think, in episode 2 or 3 of the drawing course, right? We do this value scale, and if this is our darkest, right, it like your line here, your darkest line is maybe a 4, and then we've got the page is 8. So it might be nice if we could get a 1 or 2 or 3 and really amp up those contrasts, like especially like in the eyes. Like, can you imagine if we had something darker in these, like just in the pupils, maybe on the eyelid, in the nostrils and the lips, maybe just underneath the chin, maybe a little bit on the clothing, a little bit in the ears, a little bit in the, like just little bits in a few different places. And I think this kind of a drawing will come to life even more than it already is. Wow, like, cool. I like this drawing. You know, is the chin maybe a little bit skewed? Maybe. But again, I have a pretty high tolerance for distortion and abstraction. Like this, in fact, if anything, a lot of your drawings, Alex, remind me a lot of another artist that we looked at is part of the drawing, or no, the painting, the original painting course, Chris O'Feely. I'll just write it down here. I think it's 2 F's and 1 L. It could be 1 F and 2 L's. I can't remember. But Chris O'Feely is, you know, one of the great contemporary artists of our time. He's of African descent. He lives in England. He won the Turner Prize, which is the largest art prize in the British Commonwealth, and he's one of my favorite artists of all time. And I would say he, like Aaron Douglas, another African American artist, who does like really interesting distortions with things. Like often the faces have a little bit of what I see Like this, I don't see any distortion here. Maybe a little bit in there. This is a really nice drawing. I love that hand. That's nice as well. The one thing I would say here, Alex, is maybe a little bit too many wrinkles on that hand, because that makes her hands maybe look a little bit older than her face. She looks quite young. Little minor detail, but again, I think this would benefit, especially if her eyes were much darker. I think that would be really pop. That's cool. I think you said my first time drawing a graduation student. I love that. You know, and this hand, yeah, could use a little bit of work, but hands are some of the most difficult things to draw. So the fact that you're even attempting it makes me really, really happy. And you're just going to get better and better the more you do. I love this one. This might be my favorite. I love this guy with his hat and those glasses. And the glasses, yeah, they're a little bit crooked, but it kind of makes me think maybe that's the way this guy rolls, right? He's just he doesn't really care if his glasses are a little bit crooked. He's pretty cool, pretty comfortable with who he is. So I like that. I love seeing, these are all really cool. There's a lot of personality in your drawings, and I just want to see way, way, way more of them. I see some people in the chat. Sandra says, I might be going to Nairobi in September and thinking of meeting up with him to bring him some supplies as a gift. Wow, that would be awesome. You guys talking about getting him some supplies? He has limited access to materials. That would be so awesome. If we could get that together, that would be like, I would be so proud of this community if we could organize something like that. And I'm not sure how I can help, but it looks like you guys are already been talking about this or doing. That's wow, that's awesome. That would be super cool. I'd love to assist in any way. But yeah, like, it's so funny. Donna says my glasses are usually crooked too. So these are, you know, actually I see here there's some really nice blending. So see here where we have a little bit more contrast. Even here, like you see, like the how these eyes being darker here and the glasses being darker. This face pops, right? That is awesome. So I think we just want a little bit more of that in these drawings. Otherwise, they're really cool. And these could look really neat as I think I could imagine these looking really cool as posters. And I think they could also look really cool as tattoos. Like, she's got tattoos on her face, but I could imagine this being a really cool tattoo on somebody else's body, just because of the line work you're drawing here. That's cool. These are great. Okay, so I think we've got up to the top here, and I think just to kind of bring us full circle, I wanted to kind of share these artworks that Charmaine did. And my apologies, I'm trying to remember, Charmaine, is this your grandfather or your father? My apologies, I can't remember who this was on the Facebook group, but I love this photograph. Like, what a happy fellow, right? He seems like a really cool guy. I love that smile. Oh, it's like my grandmother used to say, he has smiling eyes, right? That's totally, what a happy fellow. And then this is your drawing of him. What a great drawing. And just like we were talking with Alex, right? If we amp up some of the contrast, some of the darker areas, like right around the nose, mouths, eyes, get a little bit of some darker areas, all of a sudden that drawing starts to come into our world. And that's fantastic. And then here's this, I think this is the beginning stage of the painting. And then this is the final, I think that's the final version, right? Here's this one. That is great. Wow, so here's where we began, where we ended. That's cool. I even think, like, I like this too. You know, I appreciate going all the way to the end and putting in all the detail and the flowers. But I'm also quite attracted to paintings like this, you know, that are maybe a little bit, that some people would say is an unfinished painting, and I think as part of this process it was kind of a stage in the making of the painting. But I also like this kind of thing too, because it feels almost more spontaneous. Like, this is great, but, you know, especially when we're doing paintings of someone like laughing or smiling, there's it's quite hard to finish that painting without kind of killing the energy that exists maybe in this more spontaneous earlier version of the painting. I'm not saying that happened here and the energy is no longer there, because I think really the face is almost, you know, untouched from here to here. I do think, you know, maybe one little thing here is that these eyes have gotten really dark, and they're just sort of they're a little bit black and empty. And you might say, well, that's what the photograph looks like. Like, when we look at this, I look at the photo and it looks totally dark. But the thing is it's not just like, that's maybe what the photograph looks like, but when we do our painting we might have to change things. And so I would say is I would like to see maybe a little bit more like the white of his eyes. Again, not like white like in his hair, but like a value that might be like one of these dark grays. And so we just see the only place that is actually black would be his eye, the pupil or the iris, and then everything else is lightened up a little bit, because I think that kind of takes some of the life out of the portrait that I think I see more in here. Right? So you can see how the entire eye is much lighter because you're not finished. You're just you're blocking this in. So it's kind of lighter. I think if like at this stage, if we had just darkened here, that would have been enough. So I think we went maybe a little bit far, or maybe we just need to add a little bit. And I think that will bring a little bit more life back in, because right now it looks like the eyes are a little bit too blank. Again, tiny little detail, but boy oh boy, that is quite the achievement. So I think that brings us to the end for today. I've been blabbing on and on and on for quite a while. So thank you everyone for joining me for painting along with me today, but for celebrating all of the paintings that you guys have done. And it's so exciting to see this incredible community of people. Like, I was just thinking today, like, the fact that this is where I am at this point in my life, and that there's almost 300 of you who are painting and who are uploading your work and sharing them with us, people from around the world. And then it's gotten to the point where people are talking in the chat about sending art supplies to someone on the other side of the planet who doesn't like. That is it's just beyond my wildest hopes for what I want. I just started just doing this when COVID happened, and this is where things, the trail has taken us, is just like, I'm so excited, I'm so proud. There's more things that I want to do going forward as part of this group, but yeah, you know, I can talk endlessly about things and I'm at a loss for words. So that's just gives you a little bit of an idea of how I feel about this. So thank you guys. Thank you so much for continuing to follow and lead this this thing that we're doing here. I look forward to seeing you guys on Tuesday. We're going to be painting Acrylic painting. We're going to look at, I think, 2 Ukrainian artists this next week. And so this is one of them, right? This is going to be our easy painting for Tuesday. And then on Thursday, we got something that's got a lot more detail. So anyway, all that stuff, I think I posted a bit on the Facebook group of some of the upcoming episodes. I look forward to seeing you guys over the next little bit, and regardless of whether you're painting along with the paintings in class or something else, keep uploading these awesome works to the group. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll talk to you all again very soon. Good night, everybody.